After I refused to fund my brother-in-law's fake startup, my own parents reported my car stolen with me inside it. I found myself staring down the barrels of 3 police-issued firearms on the interstate. But when the lead officer approached my window, the entire situation flipped. He lowered his weapon, took off his sunglasses, and let out a heavy sigh. Baby, what did they do now? Then he tapped his body camera and smiled. Let us give them a call. My name is Chloe. I am 33 years old, and I run a highly successful cybersecurity firm that my family believes is just a basic customer service help desk job. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to toxic family members who tried to destroy your life out of sheer spite. The red and blue lights flashing in the rearview mirror of my Porsche Macan were absolutely blinding. I had just merged onto the interstate when the first siren wailed behind me. Before I could process what was happening, 2 more cruisers flanked me, forcing me onto the rough gravel shoulder. My heart hammered wildly against my ribs. I threw the car into park and rolled down the window. Through the side mirror, I saw 3 officers stepping out of their vehicles. They had their weapons drawn, shouting commands over a megaphone. Driver, turn off the engine and step out of the vehicle with your hands raised. Pure panic seized my chest. I had never even received a minor speeding ticket, let alone face the terrifying reality of a felony traffic stop. My hands shook violently as I pushed the car door open. The cold air hit my face as I stepped out, raising my empty hands high above my head, trembling uncontrollably. Keep your hands where I can see them. A loud voice barked from the closest cruiser. The lead officer moved aggressively toward my door, his posture tense and ready for a serious altercation. I squeezed my eyes shut, bracing for the absolute worst-case scenario. But as the heavy boots stopped just inches from me, the aggressive shouting abruptly ceased. The deafening tension simply evaporated into the cold air. I slowly opened my eyes. The tall, broad-shouldered officer standing in front of me reached up and pulled off his mirrored sunglasses. It was Marcus, my fiancé, a senior patrol detective who knew exactly what kind of manipulative status obsessed people my parents were. He holstered his weapon instantly, his stern professional expression dissolving into pure, unadulterated confusion, followed rapidly by dark realization. Baby, what did they do now? Marcus asked, his voice dropping to a gentle, familiar tone, as he signaled for the other officers to stand down and lower their weapons. I could barely form the words to respond. My throat felt incredibly tight, and my knees threatened to buckle right there on the highway. What is going on, Marcus? Why did you pull me over like a dangerous criminal? He stepped closer, placing a reassuring, warm hand on my trembling shoulder. Dispatch just put out a high-priority felony alert on this exact license plate. A stolen vehicle report was filed less than 30 minutes ago. Your father Thomas personally called it in. He told the operator that an unknown thief had taken the car right out of their driveway. The realization hit me like a physical blow to the stomach. This was not a silly misunderstanding. This was a calculated, malicious punishment. Just 12 hours earlier, I had sat in my parents' pristine living room and firmly refused to hand over $15,000 to my sister Brittany's husband Jamal. Jamal is a charismatic African-American man who constantly pitches imaginary business ventures to anyone who will listen. He has a closet full of expensive designer suits and a silver tongue, but he has not held a real paying job in 5 years. He needed the cash immediately for his supposed new logistics startup, and when I looked him in the eye and said no, the entire family turned on me like a pack of wolves. My parents accused me of being a selfish, jealous spinster trying to ruin a successful entrepreneur's bright future. Brittany cried theatrical fake tears, claiming I always wanted to see her fail because she was the golden child, and I was just the disappointment of the family. They demanded I leave their house and never come back until I learned how to properly support my family. I drove away in the car, They somehow still believed they had absolute authority over simply because they had casually co-signed a minor insurance document 3 years ago when I first bought the vehicle. They honestly thought they could weaponize the police department to teach me a harsh lesson about obedience and respect. I explained the entire fight to Marcus right there on the shoulder of the highway. As I spoke, I watched his jaw tighten with highly controlled fury. Marcus had spent the last 2 years watching my parents treat me as the designated family scapegoat, favoring Brittany's every ridiculous demand, while entirely dismissing my very existence. But filing a false felony report to terrorize me on the road crossed a dangerous legal line he absolutely would not ignore. Instead of getting on his radio to clear the stolen vehicle alert right away, Marcus took a slow step back. He pointed to the black device strapped securely to the center of his chest. He tapped it once with his index finger, ensuring the red recording light was glowing brightly in the evening dusk. "Call them!" Marcus ordered, his voice carrying the calm, steady authority of a seasoned detective who had just found the perfect piece of evidence. "Put it on speaker." I pulled my phone out of my pocket, my hands finally stopping their shaking. My thumb hovered over the screen before pressing the speed dial for my mother. The line rang twice, echoing loudly in the quiet, tense air of the highway shoulder. Marcus stood perfectly still outside my window, his posture rigid and his eyes locked on the glowing red light of his police body camera. He gave me a single sharp nod. "Hello," my mother answered, her voice dripping with a smug, sickly sweet satisfaction that immediately made my stomach churn. She sounded like she was sipping wine at a country club, completely unbothered by the fact that her daughter was currently surrounded by armed police officers. "Mom, why was I just pulled over on the interstate by 3 police cruisers with their guns drawn?" I asked, forcing my voice to tremble slightly, playing into the fear she undoubtedly wanted to hear. A sharp, cruel laugh crackled through the phone speaker. It was the exact same laugh she used whenever my sister Brittany secured another handout from the family vault, while I was told to work a double shift to pay my own way. "Well, consider that a harsh lesson for a selfish brat," my mother said, her tone suddenly turning cold and venomous. "You honestly thought you could just walk out of our house last night and ruin Jamal's business by hoarding your money? We reported the car stolen, Chloe. We co-signed a secondary insurance paper on that vehicle 3 years ago, which means we practically own it, and we can take it back whenever we see fit." I glanced up at Marcus. His jaw tightened so hard I thought his teeth might crack, but he kept his face completely out of view of my phone screen. He pointed to his chest, mouthing the word, "Keep going." "You filed a false police report and told them a thief took my car?" I asked, making sure my words were incredibly clear for the recording. "You know I am the one driving it. You know I live in this car to get to my job, and we know exactly how to get your attention." She snapped back without a shred of hesitation. "You want this to end? Pay Jamal the $15,000 right now, or enjoy your night sitting in a holding cell. Maybe spending a few hours behind bars will teach you some much-needed respect for your family. Jamal has a brilliant logistics startup ready to launch, and you are selfishly withholding the capital he needs." My mother was so blinded by her obsession with protecting Brittany's husband that she had no idea she had just confessed to felony extortion and filing a false police report on a recorded government-issued device. She truly believed that because she was my mother, the law simply did not apply to her. She thought she could manipulate the legal system to act as her personal debt collector. Marcus leaned closer to the window, remaining completely silent. He held up his hand, signaling me to wrap up the call. He had heard enough, and the body camera had captured every single damning syllable. "I do not have $15,000 just sitting in my checking account to hand over to Jamal," I said, keeping my voice steady. "And you cannot just report my car stolen to punish me." "Watch us," she sneered. "We are your parents. We gave you everything, and this is how you repay us. You have exactly 1 hour to wire that money to Jamal, or we will tell the precinct to press full grand theft auto charges. Call us when you stop being so stubborn." The line went dead. The silence in my car was deafening, broken only by the distant hum of highway traffic rushing past us. I looked up at Marcus. He exhaled a long, heavy breath, his eyes wide with a mixture of disbelief and fierce, protective anger. Did she really just admit to using a felony police response to extort you for $15,000? Marcus asked, his voice low and dangerous. She did, I replied, staring at my darkened phone screen. She thinks she owns the car because she signed an insurance waiver 3 years ago. She has no idea I transferred the title to my corporate LLC 6 months ago. She has absolutely zero legal claim to this vehicle. A slow, predatory smile spread across Marcus's face. He reached for the radio microphone clipped to his shoulder. He did not immediately call for her arrest. Instead, he made a brilliant tactical decision to give them just enough rope to hang themselves completely. "Dispatch, this is Detective Jenkins," Marcus said into the radio, his tone shifting instantly to a bored routine cadence. "Go ahead and cancel the stolen vehicle alert on that Porsche Macan. I have the driver here. It was a clerical error by the reporting party. A family dispute over vehicle borrowing privileges. No crime committed at this time. Clear the units. Copy that, detective." Alert cleared, the dispatcher responded. Marcus released the radio button and looked down at me. If I arrest her right now, she will claim she misunderstood the insurance paperwork and play the confused, innocent mother. We are not going to do that. We are going to let them think their little highway terror tactic worked. We are going to let them double down. Before I could even process his plan, my phone chimed with an incoming text message. I swiped open the screen. It was from Jamal. It was not a text, but a photo. The image showed my old childhood bedroom at my parents' house. In the center of the room sat 3 large black trash bags filled to the brim with my high school yearbooks, my old trophies, and the few personal belongings I still kept there. Underneath the photo was a message that made my blood run absolutely cold. "Transfer the 15,000 or your stuff goes in the trash. The garbage truck comes at 6 tomorrow morning. Stop playing games and support your family. See you at the house." I stared at the screen, reading the words over and over again. They were not just trying to scare me. They were actively holding my entire past hostage to fund a man who had never worked a day in his life. The sheer entitlement was suffocating. I showed the screen to Marcus. He read the message, his eyes narrowing. He stepped back from my car and adjusted his duty belt. "Drive safe, baby," he said, his voice dropping to a serious, commanding tone. "Go to the house. I will be right behind you in an unmarked car. Let them think they have won. Let them put all their cards on the table." I gripped the leather steering wheel, the fear that had paralyzed me just minutes ago entirely gone, replaced by a cold, burning resolve. I put the Porsche into drive, checked my mirrors, and merged back onto the highway, turning the car around to head straight into the lion's den. The drive to my parents' house took less than 20 minutes, but my mind raced the entire way. Marcus kept true to his word, his unmarked dark sedan trailing a safe distance behind me, practically invisible in the evening shadows. When I pulled into the wide paved driveway of my childhood home, I parked right in the center. I wanted them to see the car they had just falsely reported stolen sitting proudly on their property. I stepped out, the cool night air biting at my cheeks, and pushed the heavy oak front door open without knocking. The scene in the living room looked like a staged commercial for upper-middle-class bliss, entirely disconnected from the felony they had just initiated. A fire crackled in the stone hearth. Brenda and Thomas were relaxed on the expensive leather sofa, holding crystal goblets of red wine. Brittany and Jamal sat across from them, looking like the perfect happy couple. To the left of the doorway, just as Jamal had promised in his text, sat 3 black garbage bags stuffed with my personal belongings. They were literally drinking to my submission. When I walked into the room, the casual chatter stopped. 4 pairs of eyes locked onto me, gleaming with an identical, sickeningly smug satisfaction. They genuinely believed the police had dragged me out of my car, terrified me into compliance, and sent me crawling back to buy my freedom. "Look who decided to join us, my mother," Brenda said, taking a slow, dramatic sip of her wine. "I hope you had a pleasant drive over, Chloe. Did you learn your lesson about respecting the people who gave you everything?" Before I could even respond to her sheer audacity, Jamal stood up. He smoothed the lapels of his tailored suit, a suit undoubtedly bought with my parents' money, and flashed a brilliant, entirely hollow smile. He walked over to the glass coffee table and turned a sleek silver laptop toward me. The screen was brightly lit, displaying an open wire transfer portal with his bank routing numbers already filled out. "Glad you could make it, sis," Jamal said, his voice oozing with that fake charismatic charm he used to swindle everyone in his path. "Let us put all this ugly business behind us. Just a quick wire transfer right here. $15,000 is a small price to pay to keep the family peace and keep you out of a jail cell. Family helps family, Chloe. You know that." I stared at the laptop screen, then looked up at Jamal. I crossed my arms over my chest and planted my feet firmly into the hardwood floor. "I am not giving you a single cent, Jamal. There will be no wire transfer. There will be no funding for whatever imaginary logistics startup you are pitching this month. The answer is absolutely not." The silence that followed was heavy and sharp. Jamal's fake smile vanished, replaced by a cold, hard glare. But it was Brittany who reacted first. My younger sister leaped off the armchair, her face immediately contorting into a mask of pure theatrical agony. She burst into tears on command, a manipulation tactic she had perfected by the age of 6. "I cannot believe you," Brittany shrieked, clutching Jamal's arm as if I had just physically attacked him. "You have always been so incredibly jealous of me. You just want my husband to fail because your own life is completely pathetic. You cannot handle the fact that I found a brilliant, successful man while you sit alone in your apartment every night. You are just a bitter, lonely woman who cannot get a man to look twice at her, so you want to destroy my marriage." I barely kept my face straight. Brittany was entirely unaware of Marcus. Unaware that a decorated police detective had just placed a diamond ring on my finger 2 months ago. She truly believed her unemployed scam artist husband was the absolute peak of masculine success, and that I was somehow deeply envious of her chaotic, debt-ridden life. "Brittany, your husband is a con artist," I said, keeping my tone deadly calm. "He is bleeding mom and dad dry, and now he is trying to extort me. I am not funding his lifestyle." "That is enough." The booming voice of my father shook the living room. Thomas slammed his heavy fist down on the glass coffee table so hard the wine glasses rattled. He stood up, his face flushed with explosive rage, marching toward me until he was mere inches from my face. He tried to use his physical size to intimidate me, looming over me with a look of absolute disgust. "You are going to sit down at that computer and send the money right now," Thomas growled, his finger pointing aggressively at my chest. "You arrogant, ungrateful brat. I called the police tonight, Chloe. I reported that Porsche stolen. Do you have any idea what happens when they catch you driving a stolen vehicle? You will be dragged out of this house in handcuffs. You will be booked for grand theft auto. Your basic little IT job will fire you the second you catch a felony charge." He leaned closer, his breath hot against my face. "Pay your brother-in-law the $15,000, or I swear to you, I will make one phone call and ensure you spend the next 5 years behind bars. I will ruin your life without a second thought. Leave the keys on the counter and get out of my sight." He was so incredibly confident in his absolute power over me. He thought the law was a tool he could simply purchase and use to force me into submission. He thought the car belonged to him. I did not flinch. I did not step back. I looked my father dead in the eye, feeling a profound sense of pity for the massive, humiliating reality check he was about to receive. I reached my right hand into my black leather designer bag. I did not pull out my checkbook. I did not pull out my car keys. Instead, my fingers wrapped around a thick, sealed corporate envelope. I pulled it out and held it up under the warm glow of the living room chandelier, ready to show them exactly who they were messing with. I dropped the thick manila envelope directly onto the center of the glass coffee table. It landed with a heavy, satisfying thud right over Jamal's laptop keyboard. Jamal flinched, pulling his hands back as if the paper itself might burn him. My father scoffed, crossing his arms over his chest, clearly expecting me to produce a stack of cash or a cashier's check to beg for his mercy. Instead, I reached out, hooked my finger under the flap, and tore it open. I pulled out a single crisp sheet of official state watermarked paper and slid it across the glass toward my father. "Read it, Thomas," I said, deliberately dropping the title of Dad for the first time in my life. Read the exact name listed under the registered owner. My father snatched the paper up, a condescending sneer plastered across his face. Brenda leaned over his shoulder, her wineglass hovering dangerously close to the document. Brittany and Jamal exchanged confused glances, sensing that the dynamic in the room was rapidly shifting away from their carefully orchestrated ambush. Thomas adjusted his reading glasses. He stared at the paper for a few seconds. His sneer slowly faltered. "This is a vehicle master title," he muttered, sounding more annoyed than anything else. "It says the owner is Aegis Cyber Solutions Limited Liability Company. What kind of stupid game are you playing, Chloe?" "Where is the wire transfer for Jamal?" "I am not playing a game," I replied, stepping forward and pointing at the document in his hand. "That piece of paper proves that the Porsche sitting in your driveway right now is fully paid off. It is not leased, it is not financed, and most importantly, it does not belong to you, Brenda, or any other individual person in this room. It belongs entirely to a corporate entity." Brenda waved her hand dismissively, spilling a drop of red wine on the expensive rug. "Do not be ridiculous, Chloe. We co-signed the insurance on that vehicle 3 years ago when you could barely afford the down payment. We are on the policy. That makes us partial owners, which means we have every right to report it stolen when you decide to disrespect this family and withhold money from your sister." "You co-signed a secondary insurance binder when I was 30. I corrected her, keeping my voice incredibly level. "I canceled that specific policy exactly 30 days later after I transferred the title into the name of my company. I only let you believe your names were still attached because I knew how much you loved bragging to your country club friends about funding your daughter's lifestyle. But legally, your names have been wiped from that vehicle for almost 3 full years." The color began to drain from my father's face. He looked from the title down to Jamal, then back to me. His mind was struggling to process the legal reality of what he had just done. "Aegis Cyber Solutions is my cybersecurity firm." I continued, letting the truth hit them with full force. "I am the sole founder and the chief executive officer. And you, Thomas, did not just file a false police report to teach your daughter a petty lesson. You filed a fraudulent grand theft auto claim against a multi-million-dollar corporate entity. You weaponized an emergency police dispatch to illegally seize a corporate asset out of pure spite. That is not a simple family dispute. That is a massive federal crime." The silence in the living room was absolute. Brittany stopped her fake crying instantly, her mouth hanging open. Jamal slowly closed his laptop, realizing that his easy payday had just violently evaporated. My father stood perfectly still, his knuckles turning white as he gripped the title. I could literally see the gears grinding in his head. The sheer terror of facing real legal consequences was warring with his monumental, fragile ego. For a split second, I thought he might actually apologize. I thought he might realize the catastrophic mistake he had made and try to back down. But narcissistic pride is a dangerous, blinding thing. Thomas's brief moment of pale terror suddenly morphed into a blinding, explosive rage. "You are lying!" Thomas bellowed, throwing the title back onto the coffee table. He pointed a shaking finger at my face, utilizing his favorite tactic of deny attack and reverse victim and offender. "You printed a fake document to try and scare us into backing off. You do not own a multi-million-dollar company. You are a glorified IT help desk worker. You fix computer glitches for a living. You are wearing a cheap suit and driving a car you probably leased with high-interest credit card debt." I did not even blink. "Call the police precinct." Then I challenged him. "Call them back right now and ask them why they cleared the stolen vehicle alert. Ask them why the responding detective looked at this exact title, verified the corporate registration through the state database, and let me drive away safely. Go ahead, Thomas. Pick up your phone and call their bluff." Thomas breathed heavily, his chest heaving, but his hands stayed firmly planted at his sides. He knew I was telling the truth, and it was tearing him apart from the inside out. He could not handle the fact that the daughter he had treated like a complete failure for her entire adult life was standing in his living room completely untouchable by his petty threats. Brittany jumped up from the couch, unable to stand, not being the absolute center of attention for more than 5 minutes. You are a monster, Chloe, she screamed, pointing her manicured finger at me. You come in here waving fake papers around, trying to send our father to jail just because my husband asked for a tiny little loan. You are toxic, and you hate our family. A loan requires an intent to repay, Brittany, I said, looking directly at Jamal, who immediately looked down at his expensive shoes. Your husband is running a scam. I will not fund his lies. Brenda saw her husband's authority crumbling and her golden child throwing a tantrum. She stepped forward physically, placing herself between me and Thomas. Her eyes were narrowed into cold, spiteful slits. If she could not control me with the car, she would find another chain to pull to force my submission. Fine, Brenda shrieked, her voice echoing sharply off the vaulted ceilings. Keep your stupid car. Keep your little imaginary company, but do not forget who put a roof over your head. You are living in a luxury downtown apartment that we secured for you. We signed those lease papers because your credit was absolute trash. We are your landlords, Chloe, and we hold all the power here. She crossed her arms, a sickeningly triumphant smile returning to her face as she delivered her final desperate blow. Get out of our property by tomorrow. You are officially evicted. Leave your apartment keys on the kitchen counter by noon, or I will personally drive down there and throw all of your pathetic belongings out onto the cold concrete sidewalk. I did not dignify Brenda's unhinged screaming with a single response. I simply turned on my heel, walked out the heavy oak door, and drove my corporate-owned Porsche back to the city, leaving them to stew in their own toxic, impotent rage. Marcus called me on the drive back to ensure I was safe, his calm, steady voice immediately grounding me. He promised to run a quiet check on Jamal the next day, but I told him to hold off. This was my family, and this was my fight. When I finally unlocked the door to my downtown high-rise apartment, I felt an overwhelming sense of peace. The battle lines were officially drawn. The next morning, the bright city sun streamed through my floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long shadows across the hardwood floor. I felt rested, energized, and entirely unbothered by the previous night's spectacular chaos. But my parents were never ones to let a perceived slight go unpunished. I walked to the front door to grab my morning grocery delivery and stopped dead in my tracks. Taped roughly to the polished wood of my front door was a piece of standard cheap printer paper. The words, "Eviction Notice," were typed in bold, glaring red letters at the very top. I pulled it down and read the completely fabricated, legally illiterate document. Thomas had apparently driven down here in the dead of night to tape this pathetic threat to my door. The letter claimed I had violated the terms of my lease by disrespecting the primary leaseholders and demanded I vacate the premises by noon today. I laughed so hard the sound echoed down the empty hallway. They genuinely believed that signing as a guarantor on my first rental lease 5 years ago gave them supreme authority over an apartment I had subsequently purchased outright last year. I owned this property free and clear. My parents had absolutely zero legal standing here, just like they had zero claim to my car. They were operating on a terrifying cocktail of pure arrogance and complete ignorance. As I walked back into my kitchen to brew some coffee, my phone suddenly vibrated violently against the granite counter. It was followed by a relentless, unending chorus of notification chimes. I unlocked the screen, opened my family's social media feed, and immediately saw the source of the digital avalanche. Brittany had posted a 15-minute video heavily filtered and perfectly orchestrated for maximum sympathy. She was sitting in her pristine living room, dabbing at her completely dry eyes with a tissue. She spun a wild fabricated tale to our entire extended network about how her cruel, bitter older sister was actively attempting to ruin her marriage out of sheer jealousy. She called me a massive freeloader who was currently refusing to leave our parents' property. She cried theatrical tears about how incredibly hard Jamal was working on his brilliant logistics startup and how I was selfishly withholding family funds that rightfully belonged to him. The performance was nauseatingly effective. The extended family had swallowed Brittany's golden child routine hook, line, and sinker. My inbox was instantly flooded with aggressive, venomous messages from people I had not spoken to in years. Aunt Susan told me I was a complete disgrace to the family name and demanded I stop being so horribly selfish to my own blood. My cousin David sent a barrage of angry texts ordering me to support Jamal's dream and pay the back rent I supposedly owed my struggling parents. They were all stepping up as my mother's personal flying monkeys, weaponized to bully me into submission and shame me back into my designated role as the family scapegoat. I did not shed a single tear. I did not type out a frantic defensive reply to any of them. Instead, I poured myself a strong cup of black coffee, tied my hair up, and walked straight into my home office. I sat down in my ergonomic chair and woke up my custom-built dual-monitor workstation. If Jamal wanted to play digital games with my life, I was going to rip his entire world wide open. Aegis Cyber Solutions was not just a fancy name on a car title. I was a highly trained digital forensics expert who cracked corporate security systems for a living. I stretched my fingers, pulled up my encrypted search portals, and began running a deep dive background check into Jamal's supposed business empire. I started with the basics. I pulled public state records, cross-referenced his associated limited liability companies, and dug into the business registry filings. He had indeed registered a business name 2 years ago, right around the time he married Brittany. But that was where the legitimacy entirely stopped. My fingers flew across the mechanical keyboard as I bypassed the superficial public records and dug into the financial footprints he thought he had cleverly hidden. It did not take long for the shiny, impressive veneer of his logistics startup to completely disintegrate. There were no commercial vehicles registered to his company anywhere in the state. There were no warehouse leases matching his business identification number. There were absolutely no payroll records, no vendor contracts, and no commercial insurance policies. I pushed harder, tracing the routing numbers he had carelessly displayed on his laptop screen the night before. Using open-source intelligence tools and a few perfectly legal backdoors I utilized for corporate auditing, I followed the digital money trail. I wanted to see exactly where the previous $80,000 my parents had already invested in him had actually gone. The data loaded onto my secondary monitor, scrolling in blocks of stark green text. I stared at the screen as the final puzzle piece locked into place. The realization hit me like a freight train. There were no offshore business accounts or hidden startup investments. The money had been funneled directly through a maze of shell accounts into multiple high-stakes unregulated sports betting platforms and private offshore gambling syndicates. Jamal was not building a logistics company. He was feeding a massive, catastrophic gambling addiction. And his desperate demand for $15,000 today had absolutely nothing to do with a business launch. He was in serious debt to some very dangerous people. I stared at the dual monitors lighting up my otherwise dark home office, the sheer magnitude of Jamal's deception unfolding in real time across the glowing screens. The initial $80,000 my parents had so proudly handed him as seed money was completely gone, vaporized into a digital black hole. I traced the routing numbers through a maze of shell accounts, watching the funds scatter across unregulated sports betting platforms and private offshore gambling syndicates based in Malta and Curaçao. I sifted through the transactional data, noting the desperate high-stakes parlays and massive poker losses. He was bleeding cash at an exponential rate. But that was just the superficial layer of his financial rot. I ran a targeted script to pull his current credit liabilities and linked marital assets. My secondary monitor populated with a staggering wall of red numbers. Jamal had completely maxed out 7 different high-limit credit cards, all opened fraudulently in my sister Brittany's name. He had systematically defaulted on 4 separate high-interest personal loans over the past 18 months. I pivoted my search, digging into the supposedly brilliant logistics startup that required my immediate $15,000 sacrifice. It took me exactly 2 minutes to completely dismantle the grand illusion. Jamal had not filed a single piece of incorporation paperwork with the State Commerce Board. He possessed no corporate tax identification number. He had 0 employees, 0 commercial vehicle assets, and 0 physical office space. The brilliant business my parents were perfectly willing to destroy my life over was nothing more than a $15 domain name registered through a discount hosting site. The website was a hollow shell featuring a single landing page plastered with free stock photos of cargo ships where the watermarks had barely been cropped out. But the money he had stolen from my parents and the credit he had ruined for my sister was still not enough to cover the massive cascading gambling debts he had accumulated. His digital footprint revealed a frantic desperation. I tracked a recent unusually large deposit into his primary checking account. It was a wire transfer for $120,000 originating from a subprime lending institution. I traced the loan origination document deploying a few highly specialized decryption tools to bypass a weak commercial firewall and view the actual PDF file. My breath caught in my throat. I leaned closer to the monitor, my eyes scanning the heavily redacted lines and legal jargon. It was a home equity line of credit, a second mortgage. I pulled up the property address attached to the collateral agreement. It was my parents' house. Jamal had secretly taken out a massive second mortgage on the very home my parents were currently using to threaten and evict me. I scrolled rapidly down to the authorization section and opened the signature page. There, sitting starkly on the digital line, was my father's signature. Or rather, a sloppy, digitally traced copy of Thomas's signature that Jamal had clearly ripped from another document. Jamal had committed blatant identity theft and mortgage fraud right under their noses. My parents were leveraged to the absolute hilt, their retirement security entirely wiped out by the man they treated like a golden son. The sound of my front door unlocking pulled me out of my deep digital dive. Marcus walked into the apartment carrying 2 cups of black coffee from the cafe down the street. He took one look at my pale face and the sprawling financial diagrams covering my monitors, and he immediately switched from a supportive fiancé to a seasoned senior patrol detective. He set the coffees down on the edge of the desk and stood behind my ergonomic chair, his eyes tracking the highlighted red columns on the screen. I walked him through the entire digital paper trail. I showed him the offshore gambling syndicates, the maxed-out credit cards bearing my sister's name, the completely fabricated logistics company, and finally the forged second mortgage on my parents' house. Marcus leaned his heavy hands on the back of my chair. His jaw was set so tight, a muscle ticked rapidly in his cheek. He pulled his phone out of his jacket pocket, his law enforcement instincts taking complete control over the situation. "This is textbook wire fraud," Chloe Marcus said, his voice hard, authoritative and uncompromising. "We are looking at aggravated identity theft, grand larceny, and felony mortgage fraud. Jamal is looking at a decade in federal prison for this scale of deception. I am calling this in right now to the Financial Crimes Unit. I can have a squad car at your parents' house in 10 minutes to drag him out of their living room in handcuffs." He started dialing his precinct captain, but I reached up and grabbed his wrist. I gently pushed his phone down, meeting his intense gaze. "Wait," I said, staring at the forged signature glowing on the monitor. "Do not call it in yet." Marcus looked at me, professional confusion fighting with his protective instincts. "Chloe, the man just stole over $100,000 from your parents and tried to extort you for 15 more using a false police report. He is a massive flight risk the second his offshore bookies start breathing down his neck." "Why are we waiting?" "Because if the police just kick the door down and arrest him right now, they will blame me," I explained, keeping my voice steady, despite the adrenaline surging through my veins. "Brittany will scream that I hacked his accounts and framed her perfect husband. Thomas and Brenda will insist that I fabricated the digital evidence because I am a jealous, bitter spinster trying to ruin their happiness. They will spend their last remaining dollars hiring him a high-priced defense attorney and fighting me in court. They will never believe a stranger with a badge over the man they have chosen to worship." I stood up from my desk and turned to face Marcus completely. They need to see the truth. They need to have the undeniable, irrefutable proof slammed right down on a table in front of their faces by their own daughter. I am going to give them one final chance, Marcus. One last opportunity to look at the cold, hard facts, realize they have been played for absolute fools, and finally choose to side with me. If they look at this evidence and still defend him, then I will walk away forever, and you can arrest him. Marcus studied my face for a long moment. He recognized the psychological necessity of this confrontation. He understood the toxic family dynamic I was trying to navigate. He slowly slid his phone back into his jacket pocket and gave me a firm nod. Okay, we do it your way. But I am coming with you this time. I am not letting you walk into that ambush alone again. I picked up my phone from the desk. I opened the family group chat. The last messages were a barrage of toxic insults from Brittany and Brenda, demanding I wire the money and vacate my apartment immediately. I ignored all of their hateful vitriol. I tapped the screen carefully, typing out a message designed to appeal directly to their greed, ensuring they would all be present. Meet me at the downtown cafe at noon, I typed. I have the $15,000, but I need to show you something first. They pushed through the heavy glass doors of the downtown cafe at exactly noon, moving as a united, impenetrable front. Thomas led the way, his chest puffed out, exuding the smug satisfaction of a patriarch who believed he had successfully whipped his rebellious daughter back into line. Brenda followed closely, her designer handbag clutched tightly in the crook of her arm, her eyes scanning the crowded room with practiced disdain. Brittany and Jamal brought up the rear. My sister was practically glowing, clinging to her husband's arm, like he was a conquering hero returning from battle. Jamal wore a sharply tailored navy suit, looking every inch the successful entrepreneur, a confident, easy smile plastered across his handsome face. I sat at a large corner table by the window, a thick black leather folder resting quietly on the polished wood in front of me. Marcus was seated 2 tables away facing the door, a newspaper obscuring his face, entirely invisible to my self-absorbed family, but perfectly positioned to intervene if Jamal decided to get physical. Thomas reached the table first. He did not bother with a greeting. He simply pulled out a chair, sat down heavily, and crossed his arms over his chest. I am glad you finally decided to stop this ridiculous tantrum and act like a responsible adult, Chloe, he said, his voice dripping with condescension. Where is the cashier's check? Jamal slid into the seat directly across from me, adjusting his expensive silk tie. I appreciate you coming around to the vision, Chloe, he said smoothly, utilizing his best boardroom pitch voice. This capital injection is exactly what we need to expedite our supply chain logistics. I was actually just telling Brittany on the ride over how this $15,000 will allow me to finalize the commercial warehouse lease by Friday afternoon. The brokers are literally waiting on my call. There are no brokers, Jamal, I said, my voice eerily calm, cutting through the ambient noise of clinking coffee cups and murmuring cafe patrons. And there is no commercial warehouse lease. Brenda slammed her hand flat against the table. Do not start this again, Chloe. You sent a message saying you had the money. If you dragged us all the way downtown just to play more of your disrespectful psychological games, we are leaving, and that eviction notice stands. I ignored my mother entirely. I kept my eyes locked on Jamal. His confident smile faltered for a fraction of a second, a tiny muscle twitching near his jawline. I reached out and rested my fingertips on the black leather folder. I told you I had the money, I said, keeping my tone perfectly level. And I do. But I also told you I needed to show you something first. I pushed the folder across the smooth surface of the table. I did not push it toward Thomas, the supposed head of the family. I did not push it toward Jamal. I slid it directly in front of my sister. Brittany stared at the black leather cover as if it were a venomous snake. What is this? She demanded, her voice shrill and defensive. Open it, Brittany, I instructed. Open it and read the name at the top of the first page. Jamal suddenly lunged forward, his hand shooting out to grab the folder, but Brittany was faster. She snatched it off the table and flipped it open. Her brow furrowed in confusion as her eyes scanned the first document. This is a credit card statement, she muttered, looking up at me. Why do you have a credit card statement with my name on it? I do not have a Platinum Reserve card. Turn the page, I said softly. Brittany turned the page. The blood drained from her face so fast she looked physically ill. Her perfectly manicured fingers began to tremble, rattling the crisp, printed paper. Her eyes darted back and forth, absorbing the impossible numbers printed in stark black ink. What is it? Brenda demanded, leaning over to look at the documents. Thomas grabbed his reading glasses from his shirt pocket, his smug demeanor evaporating into profound confusion. It says I owe $42,000, Brittany whispered, her voice cracking. It says I have 7 active credit accounts. I do not have 7 accounts. Jamal, what is this? Jamal was sweating now. The confident, tailored CEO had vanished, replaced by a cornered, desperate animal. Those are fabricated, he stammered, pointing a shaking finger at me. She is a computer hacker, Brittany. I told you she was jealous of us. She printed fake bank statements to try and ruin our marriage. Do not look at those lies. I leaned forward, folding my hands on the table. Those are certified bank records pulled directly from the lending institutions, I said, my voice carrying absolute authority. You have 0 employees, Jamal. You have 0 commercial vehicles. Your brilliant logistics startup is nothing but a $15 domain name registered through a discount hosting site. I bypassed your flimsy firewalls this morning. I traced every single dollar my parents gave you. I traced the massive credit lines you fraudulently opened using my sister's social security number. The silence at our table was deafening, a heavy, suffocating vacuum amidst the bustling cafe. Thomas stared at the documents, his face turning an alarming shade of ashen gray. Brenda covered her mouth with her hands. There is no startup, I said, driving the final nail into the coffin of his manufactured reality. Your husband is bleeding this family dry to pay off loan sharks. The offshore accounts in Malta and Curaçao tell the whole story. You are running a massive sports betting deficit, Jamal, and you are drowning. Jamal shot to his feet, his chair scraping violently against the cafe floor. Heads turned from nearby tables. He realized the facts were insurmountable, so he instantly pivoted to his ultimate calculated defense mechanism. He raised his voice, ensuring the surrounding patrons could hear his manufactured outrage. This is what this is really about, Jamal shouted, throwing his arms wide. You cannot stand it, can you, Chloe? You cannot stomach the fact that a successful black man entered your privileged, wealthy, white suburban family and actually made something of himself. You are targeting me because of my race. You are using your corporate tech resources to frame me because you are a bitter, prejudiced woman who hates seeing a black man succeed. He looked around the cafe, playing directly to the audience of strangers, weaponizing the current social climate to deflect from his massive, undeniable felonies. He expected me to shrink back. He expected me to desperately defend myself against the explosive accusation of racism, to stammer and apologize, allowing him to grab Brittany and storm out as the righteous victim. I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice. I stayed perfectly seated, staring up at him with ice-cold precision. I do not care about your race, Jamal. I said, my voice deadly quiet, but carrying enough force to freeze him right where he stood. I care that you just secretly mortgaged my parents' house for $100,000. The words hung suspended in the coffee-scented air. Thomas lowered his reading glasses. His eyes locked on the digital signature I had highlighted in bright yellow ink. I watched his brain short-circuit. For a man whose entire identity was built on being the smartest, most dominant person in the room, facing the reality that he had been catastrophically conned was an impossible psychological hurdle. His mind simply refused to process the trauma. So it did what a fragile narcissistic ego always does. It violently rejected reality and attacked the messenger. Thomas slammed his hand down so hard the coffee cups rattled in their saucers. You vindictive, hacking little brat, he hissed, his face twisting into a mask of pure venom. He shoved the folder back toward me, refusing to look at the numbers for a second longer. You doctored these documents. You used your corporate cyber skills to fabricate this entire file just to frame a good man. This is criminal, Chloe. Brenda immediately jumped onto the bandwagon of delusion, her eyes flashing with a terrifying manic denial. I knew it, she gasped, clutching her chest as if I had physically struck her. I knew you were capable of this level of toxicity. You have always been insanely jealous of your sister. You could never find a husband of your own, so you are trying to destroy hers with cheap Photoshop tricks. You are a sick, twisted girl. I sat perfectly still, my hands resting lightly on the table. Look at the notary stamps, Thomas, I said, my voice completely devoid of emotion. Look at the IP addresses logging into your bank portal. I did not fabricate a second mortgage. I do not have the power to wire $100,000 into Jamal's offshore gambling accounts. Call your bank right now, put them on speakerphone. Ask them about the equity line of credit approved last Tuesday. Thomas crossed his arms tightly, refusing to reach for his phone. His refusal to verify the facts was all the confirmation I needed. He knew deep down in the darkest corner of his mind that I was telling the exact truth. But admitting that meant admitting Jamal was a predator and Thomas was his prey. It meant admitting the golden child had married a con artist. It meant admitting their perfect country club lifestyle was built on a crumbling foundation of debt and lies. Brittany practically threw herself across Jamal, wrapping her arms around his neck as if shielding him from my digital witchcraft. Jamal immediately shifted his posture, adopting the stance of a weary, falsely accused martyr. He placed a comforting hand on Brittany's back, shaking his head with faux disappointment. "You are absolutely sick, Chloe." Brittany screamed, her voice piercing the ambient noise of the cafe and drawing the stares of every patron within a 50-foot radius. "You are so completely miserable and alone in your sterile, pathetic little apartment that you have to invent lies about my husband. Jamal is building a legacy for this family, and you are just a bitter spinster trying to drag us down to your pathetic level because you have nothing and no one." Jamal looked across the table at Thomas, his expression oozing with manufactured sympathy. "I am going to have my legal team look into this massive breach of privacy, Thomas," he said, his voice dripping with faux concern. "I am so incredibly sorry she is putting you and Brenda through this stress. We just wanted to bring the family together." "You have no legal team, Jamal," I stated flatly. "You have a bookie in Malta who is probably going to break your kneecaps by Friday." "Enough!" Thomas bellowed, standing up from his chair and looming over the table. He reached into the inside pocket of his tailored suit jacket. He did not pull out his phone to call the bank. He pulled out a thick, folded legal document. It was not a handwritten, taped-up piece of printer paper this time. It was a formal document printed on heavy stock paper, bearing the header of a strip mall law firm I recognized from local television commercials. "I knew you were unstable, Chloe," Thomas announced, his voice booming with forced theatrical authority. "I saw this complete mental breakdown coming the moment you started hoarding your money and disrespecting your mother. I had my attorney draft this up yesterday afternoon. Since you clearly cannot function in polite society, we are severing all ties." He slammed the document down on top of the offshore bank statements. "This is a legally binding 24-hour eviction notice," Thomas declared, pointing a trembling finger at the paper. "You are officially evicted from the apartment building. You will leave your keys on the kitchen counter tonight. You will not contact your mother, you will not contact your sister, and you will certainly stay away from Jamal. We are washing our hands of your toxic behavior. You are dead to us." I looked up at the four of them standing together. A profound, almost peaceful realization washed over me. I was not angry anymore. I was not hurt. I was just done. They were entirely beyond saving. They would rather fiercely protect a sociopathic scammer to maintain their shallow illusion of a perfect wealthy family than look at the undeniable proof presented by their own flesh and blood. They were choosing financial ruin and absolute denial over me. It was the final, liberating straw. The heavy chain of familial obligation I had been dragging around my entire life suddenly snapped, falling away into nothingness. I slowly reached out and picked up the heavy legal document. I read the top paragraph calmly. It cited Thomas and Brenda as the primary leaseholders and guarantors, demanding the immediate removal of the secondary tenant due to hostile behavior. I looked at Thomas, whose chest was heaving with righteous indignation. I looked at Brenda, who was glaring at me with unmasked hatred. I looked at Brittany, who was clutching her criminal husband like a life preserver. And finally, I looked dead into Jamal's eyes, seeing the raw, panicked terror hiding just behind his smug smirk. I gripped the top edge of the expensive legal paper. With one swift, deliberate motion, I ripped the eviction notice straight down the middle. I tore the halves again, letting the shredded pieces flutter down onto the table, covering Jamal's offshore betting ledgers. I looked directly at my father and delivered the reality check that was about to shatter his entire universe. "You can't evict the landlord." The words hung suspended in the thick, coffee-scented air of the bustling cafe. Thomas lowered his reading glasses, his eyes completely locked on the digital signature I had highlighted in bright yellow ink on the printed banking documents. I watched his brain physically short-circuit. For a man whose entire identity was meticulously built on being the smartest, most dominant person in any given room, facing the stark reality that he had been catastrophically conned by his favorite son-in-law was an impossible psychological hurdle. His mind simply refused to process the trauma of financial ruin. So his brain did what a fragile narcissistic ego always does when backed into an inescapable corner. It violently rejected reality and attacked the messenger. Thomas slammed his hand down onto the table so hard the porcelain coffee cups rattled dangerously in their saucers. "You vindictive, hacking little brat," he hissed, his face twisting into a terrifying mask of pure venom. He shoved the folder of evidence back toward me, refusing to look at the numbers for a single second longer. "You deliberately doctored these documents. You used your corporate cyber skills to fabricate this entire file just to frame a good man. This is criminal behavior, Chloe." Brenda immediately jumped onto his frantic bandwagon of delusion, her eyes flashing with a manic, terrifying denial. "I absolutely knew it," she gasped, clutching her pearls as if I had just physically struck her across the face. "I knew you were capable of this level of extreme toxicity. You have always been insanely jealous of your sister. You could never find a successful husband of your own, so you are actively trying to destroy hers with cheap Photoshop tricks. You are a sick, twisted girl." I sat perfectly still, my hands resting lightly on the cool surface of the table. "Look at the official notary stamps, Thomas," that I said, my voice completely devoid of any emotional inflection. "Look at the IP addresses logging into your personal bank portal. I did not fabricate a second mortgage. I do not possess the power to wire $100,000 into Jamal's offshore gambling accounts. Call your bank right now. Put their fraud department on speakerphone. Ask them directly about the home equity line of credit approved last Tuesday." Thomas crossed his arms tightly across his chest, aggressively refusing to reach for his phone. His steadfast refusal to verify the facts was all the confirmation I needed. He knew deep down in the darkest, most terrified corner of his mind that I was telling the exact truth. But admitting that meant admitting Jamal was a financial predator and Thomas was his gullible prey. It meant admitting their perfect country club lifestyle was built on a crumbling foundation of massive debt and blatant lies. Brittany practically threw herself across Jamal, wrapping her arms protectively around his neck as if she were physically shielding him from my digital witchcraft. Jamal immediately shifted his posture, adopting the cowardly stance of a weary, falsely accused martyr. He placed a comforting hand on Brittany's back, shaking his head with faux disappointment. "You are absolutely sick in the head, Chloe!" Brittany screamed, her shrill voice piercing the ambient noise of the cafe and drawing the shocked stares of every patron within a 50-foot radius. "You are so completely miserable and alone in your sterile, pathetic little apartment that you have to invent lies about my husband. Jamal is building a massive corporate legacy for this family, and you are just a bitter spinster trying to drag us down to your pathetic level because you have nothing and no one." Jamal looked across the table at Thomas, his expression oozing with manufactured sympathy and slick manipulation. "I am going to have my legal team look into this massive breach of privacy, Thomas," he said, his voice dripping with faux concern. "I am so incredibly sorry she is putting you and Brenda through this horrific stress. We just wanted to bring the family together and move past her bad behavior." "You have no legal team, Jamal," I stated flatly. "You have a desperate bookie in Malta who is probably going to break your kneecaps by Friday afternoon." "Enough!" Thomas bellowed, pushing his chair back and standing up to loom aggressively over the table. He reached into the inside breast pocket of his tailored suit jacket. He did not pull out his phone to call the bank and verify the fraud. Instead, he pulled out a thick, folded legal document. It was not a handwritten, taped-up piece of printer paper like the fake notice from yesterday. It was a formal document printed on heavy bond paper bearing the aggressive header of a strip mall law firm I instantly recognized from cheap local television commercials. "I knew you were dangerously unstable, Chloe," Thomas announced, his voice booming with forced theatrical authority intended to intimidate me. "I saw this complete mental breakdown coming the moment you started hoarding your money and disrespecting your mother. I had my attorney draft this up yesterday afternoon. Since you clearly cannot function in polite society without attacking your own blood, we are permanently severing all ties." He slammed the legal document down directly on top of Jamal's offshore betting ledgers. "This is a legally binding 24-hour eviction notice," Thomas declared, pointing a trembling, furious finger at the crisp paper. "You are officially evicted from the apartment building. You will leave your keys on the kitchen counter tonight. You will not contact your mother. You will not contact your sister, and you will certainly stay away from Jamal. We are washing our hands of your toxic behavior. You are dead to us." I looked up at the four of them standing together in a tight defensive cluster. A profound, almost beautiful realization washed over my entire body. I was not angry anymore. I was not hurt. I was just completely, utterly done. They were entirely beyond saving. They would rather fiercely protect a sociopathic scammer to maintain their shallow illusion of a perfect wealthy family than look at the undeniable proof presented by their own flesh and blood. They were actively choosing financial ruin and absolute denial over me. It was the final liberating straw, the heavy suffocating chain of familial obligation I had been dragging around my entire life suddenly snapped, falling away into pure nothingness. I slowly reached out and picked up the heavy legal document. I read the top paragraph calmly. It cited Thomas and Brenda as the primary leaseholders and guarantors, demanding the immediate removal of the secondary tenant due to hostile and erratic behavior. I looked at Thomas, whose chest was heaving with righteous indignation. I looked at Brenda, who was glaring at me with unmasked hatred. I looked at Brittany, who was clutching her criminal husband like a life preserver. And finally, I looked dead into Jamal's eyes, seeing the raw, panicked terror hiding just barely behind his smug, arrogant smirk. I gripped the top edge of the expensive legal paper. With one swift, deliberate motion, I ripped the eviction notice straight down the middle. I tore the halves again, letting the shredded pieces flutter down onto the table, completely covering Jamal's fraudulent financial records. I looked directly at my father, letting a cold, razor-sharp smile touch my lips. "You cannot evict the landlord, Thomas." Thomas sputtered, his face turning an alarming shade of violet. "You are speaking absolute gibberish," he choked out, slamming his fist on the table again. "We co-signed your lease. We hold the absolute financial leverage over your head. You are a tenant in that building, Chloe, and you are officially out on the street." I did not raise my voice. I simply reached into my leather tote bag and pulled out my iPad Pro. I tapped the screen, unlocking it, and navigated directly to the county clerk's official property records database. I wanted this execution to be as clinical and undeniable as a surgical strike. "5 years ago, you co-signed a standard rental lease because I was a recent graduate trying to build my cybersecurity company," I explained, turning the bright screen so the glare caught his eye. "But 2 years ago, the property management group that owned that entire downtown high-rise defaulted on their mezzanine loans. The building went into active aggressive foreclosure. The bank held a private commercial auction to liquidate the asset." Brenda scoffed, crossing her arms defensively. "What does a commercial bankruptcy have to do with you being an ungrateful, psychotic daughter?" "It has everything to do with it," I replied, sliding the iPad across the table to rest right on top of the shredded eviction notice. "Because Aegis Cyber Solutions did not just build a massive, lucrative revenue stream in digital forensics. I heavily diversified my portfolio. My corporate entity, specifically Aegis Real Estate Holdings, limited liability company, attended that private commercial auction. I bought the entire high-rise building straight out of foreclosure." Thomas looked down at the glowing screen. His eyes darted across the official county watermark, the parcel identification numbers, and the registered certified deed history. They're listed in indisputable black and white text as the sole owner of the multi-million-dollar property was my company name. Below it, listed as the sole managing director and registered agent, was my name. "I do not have a landlord, Thomas," I said, leaning in so he could hear every single syllable clearly over the cafe noise. I am the landlord. I own the concrete beneath your feet, the roof over your head, and every single unit in that building, including the luxury penthouse you and Brenda currently occupy. The realization hit Thomas like a physical crushing blow. His jaw went entirely slack. For the past 2 years, he had bragged endlessly to his golf buddies and country club associates about his brilliant real estate acumen, claiming he had secured an exclusive rent-free arrangement with the building's mysterious new corporate owners through his elite networking skills. He never once realized the mysterious corporate owner was the daughter he treated like a complete failure. Thomas let out a breathless, hollow laugh, desperately trying to reject the truth staring him right in the face. This is a trick, he croaked, looking at Jamal for validation, but Jamal was staring at the iPad with a look of pure, unadulterated horror. You cannot own the penthouse. We live there. We are established residents. You are holdover tenants, I corrected him with lethal precision. When I purchased the property, I quietly instructed the management firm to waive your monthly rent. I absorbed the massive cost of your luxury lifestyle as a silent, ongoing courtesy. I let you live in a 5,000 square foot penthouse for absolutely free, because despite everything, you were my parents. But that courtesy officially expired the exact second you walked into my living room, demanded I fund a gambling addict, and forged documents to steal my corporate vehicle. Brenda let out a sharp, dramatic gasp, her hand flying to her throat. The grand illusion of her untouchable wealth and status was rapidly evaporating, leaving her completely exposed to the brutal reality of their precarious financial situation. Chloe, you cannot do this. We are your family. You cannot hold a building over our heads. I am not holding anything over your head, I stated calmly, reaching back into my leather tote. I am simply executing my legal rights as the property owner. I pulled out a crisp, heavy manila envelope and placed it squarely in front of Thomas. It was not a cheap printout from a strip mall attorney. It was a perfectly formatted, legally airtight document drafted by my elite corporate legal team. This is a formal 30-day notice of a rent increase to fair market value, I announced, tapping the heavy envelope. You have been living in a premium downtown penthouse for exactly $0. Starting next week on the 1st of the month, your new monthly rent is $8,000. You are entirely responsible for all utilities, maintenance fees, and parking premiums. Thomas stared at the envelope as if it were coated in toxic acid. $8,000 a month, he choked out the number, completely breaking his brain. We cannot afford $8,000 a month. All our liquid capital is tied up in... He trailed off, his eyes darting toward Jamal. Tied up in Jamal's fabricated logistics company, I finished the sentence for him. Tied up in a fraudulent second mortgage that your son-in-law forged behind your back to pay off offshore bookies. Yes, I know exactly where your capital is, Thomas. Which means I know exactly how ruined you are. Brittany began to hyperventilate, clinging to Jamal's arm. You are making us homeless, she shrieked, the reality of her husband's crimes and her parents' imminent financial collapse finally breaking through her impenetrable wall of denial. You are actually putting our parents on the cold street. I am doing no such thing, I replied, my voice unwavering. They have a clear choice. They can sign the new lease and pay the fair market rate like any other tenant, or they can voluntarily vacate the premises. If that $8,000 payment does not clear my corporate account by 5 o'clock next Friday, my legal team will file a formal expedited eviction proceeding, and unlike your little arts and crafts project today, my eviction notice will be enforced by armed county sheriffs. The silence that blanketed the table was absolute and suffocating. The power dynamic had completely violently inverted. The golden child was married to a desperate criminal. The arrogant patriarch was financially ruined. The cruel mother was facing public humiliation and eviction. And the scapegoat daughter held the absolute deed to their entire existence. I stood up from the table, smoothing the front of my blazer. 2 tables over, Marcus folded his newspaper, stood up, and quietly walked over to stand right beside me. His presence was a silent, unyielding wall of support. He did not say a single word to my family. He did not need to. His silver badge was clipped to his belt, barely visible under his jacket, but his authoritative stance conveyed everything necessary. You have the documents, I said, looking down at the shattered remains of my family. You know exactly what you owe, and you know exactly who you owe it to. Good luck figuring out your next move. I turned and walked toward the cafe exit, Marcus falling in step right beside me. The air outside the heavy glass doors felt clean, crisp, and completely free of the toxic weight I had carried for decades. I had presented them with the absolute truth, and they had chosen their own destruction. As Marcus pushed the heavy door open for me, I paused and glanced back over my shoulder. Through the large front window, I could see the devastating aftermath at the corner table. Thomas was staring blankly at the rent increase notice, looking like a man who had just been handed a terminal diagnosis. Brenda was crying openly into her hands, the reality of her impending social exile crushing her spirit. But it was Jamal who caught my attention. The charming, charismatic facade was entirely gone. His eyes were wide, manic, and darting around the cafe like a trapped rat calculating a final desperate escape route. He leaned in close to Thomas, his hand gripping my father's shoulder with alarming intensity. He was whispering urgently into Thomas's ear, his face twisted in a mask of pure, reckless desperation. I could not hear the words through the thick glass, but his frantic gestures and wild eyes painted a very clear picture. Jamal was completely out of time, and he was actively pitching a highly illegal, catastrophic plan to get his hands on the money they all now desperately needed to survive. The sheer gravity of their financial ruin settled over the penthouse like a suffocating shroud the second they walked through the front door. Brenda paced the imported marble floors, her designer heels clicking frantically, clutching the 30-day notice of an $8,000 rent increase. She was hyperventilating, entirely unable to grasp that the luxurious lifestyle she paraded in front of her social circle was now officially owned by the daughter she had relentlessly tormented. Thomas sat at the custom mahogany dining table, staring blankly at the fraudulent mortgage documents Jamal had executed. $100,000 vanished into thin air. He was a man who had built his entire identity on financial superiority and absolute control, and now he was completely cornered. Jamal paced the opposite side of the room, his mind working in overdrive. The sports betting syndicate in Malta was not going to wait for Thomas to sell assets. Jamal needed liquid cash immediately, or his physical safety was in genuine jeopardy. He zeroed in on Thomas, recognizing the older man's desperate need to reclaim his authority and fix the unfixable. Jamal knelt beside Thomas, lowering his voice into a conspiratorial, urgent whisper. He reminded Thomas of the custom Porsche 911 Chloe drove. He expertly twisted the narrative, reminding Thomas that 5 years ago, during Chloe's final year of college, Thomas had co-signed her very first auto insurance policy to secure a bundled family discount. Jamal spun a masterful, toxic web of delusion. He convinced Thomas that because the original policy umbrella was initiated under Thomas's master account, he still retained administrative access and beneficiary status. Jamal laid out the criminal strategy with terrifying ease. He proposed they log into the insurance portal and report the pristine, high-performance vehicle as a total loss. They would claim it was the victim of a catastrophic hit-and-run while parked unattended on a dark city street. No police report needed immediately for the initial digital filing, just a claim of total structural destruction. Jamal assured Thomas that the massive premium payout for a custom Porsche would be directly routed to the master account holder. It would be an instant injection of tens of thousands of dollars in untraceable liquid cash. Enough to pay the staggering new rent cover, the most aggressive loan sharks, and buy them the time they needed to untangle the mortgage fraud. Brittany, sitting pale and trembling on the velvet sofa, fiercely defended the insane proposal. She shrieked that Chloe owed them this money after everything they had done for her. She yelled that Chloe was actively trying to destroy their family unit purely because she was miserable and alone, and therefore taking the insurance money was not a crime. It was simply reclaiming what was rightfully theirs. Thomas, completely blinded by his own arrogance and suffocating panic, latched onto the criminal lifeline. He refused to admit defeat to his own daughter. He marched into his home office, booted up his desktop computer, and navigated to his legacy insurance provider portal. He found the archived profile linked to Chloe's name and vehicle identification number. Driven by the sheer desperate need to maintain his illusion of supremacy, Thomas explicitly checked the boxes for a catastrophic total loss incident. He typed out a fabricated narrative of a devastating hit and run. He hit submit legally, verifying the fraudulent data with his electronic signature. He leaned back in his leather chair, exhaling a ragged breath, genuinely believing he had just outsmarted the system and secured his family's survival. Across the city, inside the heavily secured glass-walled headquarters of Aegis Cyber Solutions, I was sitting at my primary workstation. The monitors cast a cool blue glow across my desk. I was calmly reviewing the daily operational reports, enjoying the profound silence of a life finally swept clean of toxic familial obligations. Suddenly, a sharp, piercing chime echoed through the silent office. It was not a standard email notification or a text message ping. It was a high-priority red-level alert generated directly by my proprietary cybersecurity monitoring software. I had coded the Aegis monitoring architecture myself. It was designed to cast an impenetrable digital net over every single asset, financial account, and identification marker registered to my corporate entities. Any unauthorized inquiry or suspicious data modification instantly triggered a lockdown protocol and routed a real-time alert directly to my secure mobile device and desktop dashboard. I tapped the flashing red icon on my screen. The system decrypted the incoming alert, displaying the source origin and the exact nature of the data anomaly. I stared at the glowing text, my eyes narrowing as I processed the absolute absurdity of what I was reading. The alert indicated that a catastrophic total loss claim had just been officially filed against the specific vehicle identification number of my Porsche 911. The system had intercepted the digital routing request because the insurance provider's database automatically cross-referenced the VIN with the current updated legal title holder, which was my secure corporate LLC, not Thomas's outdated personal account. The software displayed the IP address of the user who submitted the claim. It pinpointed the exact geolocation of the luxury penthouse I owned. It displayed the electronic signature authorizing the catastrophic damage report. It was Thomas. I sat back in my ergonomic chair, letting the sheer magnitude of their stupidity wash over me. They had not merely attempted to steal money. They had bypassed civil disputes entirely and leaped headfirst into a major felony. They actually believed a 5-year-old co-signed insurance link gave them the legal authority to claim a payout on an asset they did not own, possess, or currently insure. A slow, razor-sharp smile spread across my face. I reached across my desk and picked up my encrypted smartphone. I did not hesitate for a single second. I bypassed my contacts list and hit the speed dial programmed for Marcus. The line rang twice before his deep, steady voice answered. "Marcus," I said, my voice thrumming with a lethal crystalline clarity, "I need you to contact your colleagues in the white-collar crime division immediately." I kept my eyes locked on the digital footprint of my father's ultimate demise, glowing brightly on my monitor. They didn't just double down, I continued, my smile widening into something dangerous and final. They just committed federal insurance fraud. Marcus immediately initiated a formal discreet request through his departmental channels to freeze the fraudulent claim, but we deliberately let Thomas believe the automated process was moving forward smoothly. I wanted them comfortable. I wanted them to feel that familiar, arrogant invincibility right up until the ground completely vanished beneath their feet. 3 days passed. In any rational universe, a family facing a massive hidden mortgage, a multi-million-dollar fraud exposure, and an impending eviction from a luxury penthouse would immediately initiate drastic damage control. They would slash expenses, hire defense attorneys, and beg for mercy. But Brenda was not a rational woman. She was a creature of high society, fueled entirely by the superficial perception of her peers. Canceling her and Thomas's lavish 35th anniversary gala was entirely out of the question. The caterers were already paid their non-refundable deposits. The string quartet was booked, and the grand ballroom at the downtown country club was heavily decorated. For Brenda, admitting financial defeat or canceling a major social event was a fate far worse than actual poverty. She plunged forward blindly, burying her head in the sand, determined to pop expensive champagne and wear designer gowns while the ship actively sank. She believed that if she just acted wealthy enough, the reality of her bankruptcy would somehow magically disappear. Jamal, however, was operating on pure, desperate adrenaline. The insurance payout for my Porsche was quietly tied up in an automatic fraud review queue, a direct result of Marcus's intervention. That meant the quick, untraceable cash Jamal desperately needed to satisfy his violent offshore bookies was not arriving. He was cornered, running out of time and out of easy marks. So he pivoted his predatory focus to the only remaining pool of unplundered capital. He targeted my parents' wealthy, oblivious friends. I easily intercepted his digital communications through the compromised router logs at the penthouse. He was aggressively emailing the guest list for the anniversary gala. He was setting up private 15-minute consultation windows during the cocktail hour to pitch his fake logistics startup to doctors, corporate lawyers, and real estate developers. He promised them exclusive ground floor equity in a revolutionary supply chain matrix that simply did not exist. He was planning to turn my parents' milestone anniversary into a high-stakes scammers convention, hoping to hustle enough seed money to pay off the Maltese syndicate before the entire house of cards collapsed and the authorities closed in. I knew all of this watching his frantic digital footprints from the safety of my office when the invitation arrived. It was delivered by a private courier, sealed in a thick, cream-colored envelope with heavy gold embossing. Brenda had actually sent me an invitation to the gala, but it was not an olive branch. It was a strict, arrogant summons. Inside, tucked beneath the elegant calligraphy of the event details, was a handwritten note on Brenda's personal stationery. The ink was pressed so hard into the paper I could feel the sharp indentations on the back. It read, "You are expected to attend and maintain appearances. You will publicly apologize to Jamal in front of the family for your disgraceful hysterical behavior at the cafe. If you do this to keep the family peace, your father and I might reconsider the eviction and allow you to stay in our building. Do not embarrass us." She genuinely believed she still held the high ground. She still fully believed that the threat of losing her conditional love and the entirely fake threat of an eviction would force me to grovel before a criminal. It was a masterclass in narcissistic delusion. I did not throw the invitation away. I placed it perfectly center on my desk and replied with a single polite text message confirming my attendance. Then Marcus and I went to work. We did not need to prepare a defense. We were preparing an execution. We spent the entire evening in the secure server room of Aegis Cyber Solutions, compiling the master dossier. This was no longer just about offshore bank accounts or fake rental agreements. It was a comprehensive, undeniable portfolio of federal and state crimes meticulously organized to ensure maximum devastation. We printed the IP logs, placing Thomas's exact device and location at the scene of the digital insurance fraud. We pulled the banking analytics highlighting Jamal's massive ongoing gambling deficits and his frantic attempts to wire non-existent funds. Most importantly, Marcus utilized his law enforcement access to secure the final lethal piece of evidence. When Thomas filed the total loss insurance claim online, the provider required an accompanying police report to process the massive payout. Thomas had confidently called the local precinct to report a catastrophic hit-and-run on my Porsche. Marcus pulled the responding officer's body cam video. We sat in the glow of the monitors and watched the high-definition footage. It showed Thomas standing arrogantly in the penthouse garage, explicitly lying to a uniformed police officer about a car he did not own, claiming he had parked it there the night before and found it destroyed. He committed a major felony on crystal-clear audio and video, signing a false police report with his own pen. We printed every document, burned the video files and digital logs onto sleek silver USB drives, and placed them into 10 identical black leather binders. One for Thomas, one for Brenda, one for Brittany, one for Jamal, and 6 extras for the wealthy investors Jamal planned to scam. The evening of the gala arrived with a sharp, biting chill in the air. I stood in front of my bedroom mirror, adjusting the cuffs of my tailored charcoal suit. I did not wear a dress. I wore armor. I looked calm, focused, and completely detached from the emotional wreckage of my past. The doorbell chimed. I grabbed a heavy canvas bag containing the 10 black dossiers and walked into the living room. I opened the front door and stopped dead in my tracks. Marcus stood in the hallway, He was not wearing his usual unassuming detective suit or his casual leather jacket. He was wearing his formal police dress uniform. The deep navy fabric was perfectly crisp, the brass buttons gleamed under the hallway lights, and his silver shield was pinned prominently to his chest. He looked authoritative, imposing, and entirely dangerous. The message was unmistakable. This was not a family squabble. This was an official law enforcement operation. He looked at the heavy canvas bag in my hand, then looked up to meet my eyes, a slow, predatory smile spreading across his face. Ready to ruin a party, he asked. The drive to the Oakwood Country Club was executed in tense, focused silence. Marcus dropped me off at the grand entrance, instructing me to go inside and secure our table while he had a quiet preliminary word with the club's private security director. He wanted to ensure our carefully orchestrated evening would not be interrupted by overzealous bouncers. I handed my keys to the valet and walked through the towering mahogany doors. The grand ballroom was a sickening display of manufactured opulence. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm golden glow over dozens of circular tables draped in imported silk linens. A string quartet played softly in the corner, entirely drowned out by the clinking of champagne flutes and the obnoxious laughter of the city's elite. My parents had pulled out every single stop, burning through cash they did not actually possess to maintain their fragile illusion of absolute supremacy. My entrance did not go unnoticed. While the rest of the female guests were draped in voluminous, shimmering ball gowns, I wore my tailored charcoal suit. The sharp, clean lines of the fabric fit me flawlessly, projecting an aura of lethal, untouchable corporate authority. It was deliberate armor. I kept my posture rigidly straight, my chin elevated, my eyes scanning the room with the precise calculation of a predator, assessing a deeply flawed ecosystem. The whispers started instantly. I watched my aunts, uncles, and my parents' wealthy country club associates lean their heads together behind their cocktail glasses. Their eyes darted toward me wide with manufactured scandal and greedy curiosity. They had clearly been fed Brenda's toxic narrative. They thought I was the unstable, jealous daughter who had lost her mind and was being rightfully cast out of the family empire. I could practically hear their hushed, judgmental tones echoing across the polished dance floor. I did not have to wait long for the first direct attack. Brittany detached herself from a group of younger socialites and marched directly toward me. She was wearing a blindingly expensive floor-length designer gown, covered entirely in hand-stitched emerald sequins. It was a dress that easily cost $5,000. I looked at the shimmering fabric and felt a wave of profound disgust, knowing exactly which forged line of credit had paid for it. "You actually showed up," Brittany sneered, stopping just inches from my face and looking me up and down with exaggerated revulsion. "And you wore a business suit to a formal anniversary gala. You look completely ridiculous, Chloe. Are you trying to humiliate Mom and Dad on purpose?" I smiled a tight, humorless expression. "I am dressed for business, Brittany, because tonight is strictly a business transaction." Brittany let out a harsh, mocking laugh, tossing her heavily styled hair over her shoulder. "You are so pathetic," she hissed, leaning in close so only I could hear the venom in her voice. "You are holding on to this pathetic fantasy of being some powerful executive, but look at you. You showed up to a family celebration completely alone. You could not even find a desperate +1 to drag along to your own parents' anniversary. You are a lonely, bitter woman, Chloe, and you are trying to destroy my husband because you are deeply jealous of my happiness." I maintained steady, unbroken eye contact, refusing to give her the emotional reaction she craved. Before I could deliver a response, the ambient noise in the grand ballroom experienced a sudden dramatic shift. The loud, boisterous laughter near the main entrance abruptly ceased. The silence rolled across the room like a physical wave, hushing conversations table by table. Even the string quartet seemed to falter, the cellist losing his tempo as everyone turned their attention toward the heavy mahogany doors. Marcus had entered the ballroom. He did not just walk into the room. He commanded it. His formal police dress uniform was immaculate. The deep navy fabric was sharply creased. The brass buttons gleamed fiercely under the crystal chandeliers, and his captain's insignia rested heavily on his shoulders. The silver shield pinned to his chest reflected the light, a stark, undeniable symbol of absolute legal authority. He moved with a smooth, predatory grace, his expression entirely unreadable, his eyes scanning the silent crowd until they locked directly onto me. He ignored the wealthy patrons shrinking back from his path. He ignored the whispers rapidly spreading through the room. He walked straight up to where Brittany and I were standing. Brittany took a frantic, stumbling step backward, her emerald gown swishing against the floor. The arrogant sneer completely vanished from her face, instantly replaced by stark, undisguised panic. Criminals, even proxy criminals living off stolen funds, have a visceral biological reaction to the sudden presence of high-ranking law enforcement. Marcus stopped beside me. He reached out, placed a warm, steady hand on the small of my back, and leaned down to press a soft, lingering kiss to my cheek. "Sorry for the delay," he said, his deep voice carrying easily in the sudden quiet of the room. The security director was very cooperative once I explained the situation. "You look absolutely stunning tonight." "Thank you," I replied, placing my hand over his. Across the ballroom, I watched Brenda and Thomas abruptly abandon a conversation with a prominent local judge. The color had drained entirely from Brenda's face. Thomas looked as though he had just swallowed a mouthful of shattered glass. Seeing a decorated police captain casually kissing the daughter they had just tried to illegally evict sent their deeply flawed central nervous systems into complete overdrive. They scrambled across the dance floor, nearly knocking over a waiter carrying a tray of champagne. They reached us breathless, their eyes darting frantically between my charcoal suit and Marcus's gleaming silver shield. Thomas puffed out his chest desperately, trying to project an authority he no longer possessed. "Excuse me, officer." Thomas stammered, his voice tight and overly loud, aggressively attempting to establish control in front of his watching peers. "Is there some sort of problem here? We are hosting a private, exclusive event." I stepped slightly forward, bridging the gap between my past and my future. I looked directly into my mother's terrified eyes. "There is no problem, Dad," I said, my voice projecting clearly into the silent room. "You demanded I bring a +1 and act like a respectful daughter. I am simply following your instructions." I gestured to the towering man standing beside me. "Mom, Dad, I would like to officially introduce you to Marcus," I said, watching their pupils dilate with absolute dread. "He is the captain of the local white-collar crime division. He is my +1 for the evening, and as of last week, he is also my fiancé." Brenda let out a small, strangled squeak, her hand flying to her throat as if she were actively choking on the words. Thomas swayed slightly on his feet, his mind racing to calculate exactly how much a police captain might know about fabricated logistics companies and forged total loss insurance claims. Brittany looked like she was about to faint directly onto the polished hardwood floor. Before anyone could utter a single word of response, the microphone on the main stage let out a sharp, piercing feedback whine. Jamal was standing at the podium. He had slipped away during the commotion, desperate to execute his scam before the walls closed in. He tapped the microphone twice, forcing a wide, entirely fake smile onto his sweating face. "Ladies and gentlemen," Jamal called out, his voice echoing through the massive speakers, "if you could please direct your attention to the stage. It is time for the man of the hour to share a few words about Legacy Family and the future of our incredible enterprise." Thomas tore his horrified gaze away from Marcus's silver shield. He looked at Jamal, then looked back at the heavy canvas bag resting on the floor by my feet. He knew his entire world was hanging by a frayed, burning thread. He adjusted his tie with trembling hands, turned his back on us, and began the long, agonizing march toward the stage. He stepped up to the microphone, gripping the edges of the wooden podium so tightly his knuckles turned stark white. He did not look at the crowd of wealthy investors. He did not look at Brenda. He glared directly across the ballroom, his eyes locked entirely on me and the police captain standing securely by my side. "Welcome, friends, colleagues, and esteemed guests," Thomas began, his voice booming over the state-of-the-art sound system. He forcefully tore his gaze away from Marcus's silver badge and swept his eyes across the sea of 150 wealthy patrons. He plastered on the charismatic, commanding smile that had fooled the city's elite for decades. Brenda and I are profoundly honored to celebrate 35 years of marriage partnership and family legacy with all of you tonight. A polite ripple of applause washed through the grand ballroom. Crystal clinked as guests raised their glasses. Thomas gripped the podium, his posture rigid. He was terrified, but his narcissism was a powerful anesthetic against reality. He believed that if he controlled the narrative in this room, he could somehow bend reality back to his will. When you reach a milestone like this, you naturally reflect on what truly matters. Thomas continued, his tone dripping with manufactured sincerity. You look at the empire you have built, the wealth you have generated, and you realize that none of it means anything without a strong, loyal family to carry the torch forward. He gestured grandly to the VIP table positioned directly below the stage. Brittany sat up straighter, adjusting her stolen emerald gown, completely basking in the spotlight. Jamal sat beside her, looking the picture of humble devotion. Brenda and I are incredibly blessed to have our daughter Brittany and our remarkable son-in-law Jamal standing by our side. Thomas announced, his voice swelling with theatrical pride. In Jamal, I have finally found the son I always wanted. He is a man of exceptional character, unwavering loyalty, and unparalleled vision. He is a brilliant entrepreneur who embodies the exact same relentless drive that I used to build my own success. Jamal lowered his head, pressing a hand to his chest, in a sickening display of faux humility. Brittany beamed, leaning over to kiss his cheek. The wealthy guests seated around the ballroom murmured in absolute approval, completely taken in by the carefully choreographed performance. From my seat at a table near the back, I watched the charade unfold with clinical detachment. Marcus sat beside me perfectly still, his eyes tracking every movement in the room. He was observing them not as family members, but as active suspects in an ongoing fraud investigation. The heavy canvas bag containing the 10 black leather dossiers rested securely between my feet. The tone of Thomas's voice suddenly shifted. The warm, jovial cadence dropped into something darker, laced with a passive-aggressive venom designed entirely to humiliate me in front of the city's high society. However, building a legacy also comes with profound heartbreak. Thomas proclaimed, his eyes darting back to me for a fraction of a second. The ballroom grew very quiet. The wealthy patrons leaned forward, sensing the incoming drama. It is a devastating reality when a child you raised with every advantage turns out to be a profound disappointment. It is a tragedy when a family member becomes consumed by pure greed, bottomless jealousy, and absolute selfishness. Whispers immediately erupted across the silk-draped tables. Dozens of eyes swiveled in my direction. The guests had all heard Brenda's vicious rumors, and now Thomas was validating them on an open microphone. There is nothing more painful than watching someone of your own blood completely abandon the core values of family loyalty. Thomas continued, his voice trembling with fake sorrow. When someone becomes so deeply bitter and isolated that they try to tear down the success of others, you have to make the agonizing choice to cut them out of the fold. You have to protect the family from that toxic, vindictive energy. Brenda dabbed at her dry eyes with a lace handkerchief, playing the role of the wounded, long-suffering matriarch to absolute perfection. Brittany glared at me from the front row, a triumphant, vicious smirk playing on her lips. They were publicly executing my character, attempting to socially exile me so completely that no one in this room would ever believe a word I said. But I did not shrink down in my chair. I did not blush or look away. I sat perfectly upright in my tailored charcoal suit, my hands resting calmly on the table, meeting every single judgmental stare with a gaze of absolute unyielding ice. Their opinions meant less than nothing to me. Having delivered his public shaming, Thomas swiftly pivoted to the true objective of the night. He needed cash, and he needed these 150 wealthy guests to provide it. But tonight is about looking forward, not backward, Thomas declared, his voice returning to its booming, confident pitch. Tonight is about the future, and that future is being built by Jamal. Over the past year, Jamal has been quietly developing a revolutionary logistics and supply chain startup. It is an enterprise that is going to completely disrupt the national market. The doctors, corporate lawyers, and real estate developers in the crowd sat up their ears, practically perking up at the mention of a ground floor financial opportunity. Jamal had expertly identified his marks. Brenda and I have already heavily invested our own private capital into this venture. Thomas lied flawlessly, securing the bait. Because when you see a guaranteed return, you do not hesitate. Jamal is opening up a very limited seed funding round for our closest friends and associates. I urge every single one of you to speak with him during the reception. Do not miss the chance to be part of this incredible financial legacy. Thomas stepped back from the podium. The ballroom erupted into thunderous, enthusiastic applause. The high society guests were completely hooked, eager to throw their disposable income at a project backed by the allegedly successful Thomas. Jamal stood up from the VIP table, buttoning his expensive suit jacket. He looked incredibly smug, his eyes gleaming with the predatory thrill of a successful con. He had done it. He had used my parents' desperation to secure the cash he needed to pay off his violent offshore bookies. He walked up the short flight of stairs and stepped up to the microphone, raising his hands to accept the applause. He opened his mouth entirely ready to collect his stolen funds. I reached down and gripped the heavy canvas bag. I stood up. The sudden sharp scraping of my chair against the hardwood floor cut through the fading applause like a gunshot. The sound echoed off the high vaulted ceilings. One by one, heads turned. The applause died instantly. A heavy, suffocating silence slammed down over the grand ballroom. 150 wealthy guests, my arrogant parents, my smug sister, and the cornered criminal at the podium all stared at me in absolute shock. I picked up the first black leather dossier from the bag. I looked directly at the stage, my voice ringing out with lethal, undeniable authority. Before anyone writes a check, you might want to look at the prospectus I have prepared. I did not wait for an invitation to proceed. I gripped the heavy canvas bag, squared my shoulders, and walked purposefully down the center aisle of the grand ballroom. The crowd of elite socialites, corporate executives, and wealthy developers naturally parted their eyes, tracking me, with a mixture of scandalous intrigue and outright confusion. Marcus walked a half-step behind me, his formal police dress uniform cutting a formidable path through the sea of designer gowns and expensive tuxedos. I walked directly up the short flight of stairs and stepped onto the brightly lit stage. Jamal's smug, arrogant smile vanished instantly. He took a hesitant step toward me, opening his mouth to object, but a single lethal glance from Marcus stopped him dead in his tracks. I reached the wooden podium where Jamal had set up his presentation laptop. Without a word, I pulled the sleek silver USB drive from my pocket and slammed it into the primary port, overriding his carefully animated slide deck. The massive 50-foot LED projector screen behind us flared bright white, casting harsh dramatic shadows across the entire stage. Jamal's fake corporate logistics logo disappeared into the digital ether. In its place, I projected a high-resolution, undeniable scan of the offshore gambling ledgers. The screen highlighted hundreds of thousands of dollars in violent arrears, directly cross-referenced with the fraudulent second mortgage bearing my father's electronically forged signature. The IP logs flashed in neon red text, proving the fraud was executed directly from Thomas's luxury penthouse. I pulled the microphone from its stand. A sharp burst of feedback whined for a split second before I stabilized the audio. My voice echoed through the expansive ballroom, cold, clinical, and completely devoid of mercy. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the interruption," I announced, my gaze sweeping across the 150 wealthy guests. "Thomas just spoke to you about Legacy Trust and a revolutionary logistics enterprise. He asked you to open your checkbooks and invest your hard-earned capital into his brilliant son-in-law. I am here to save you from making the worst financial mistake of your entire careers." I clicked a button on the keyboard, transitioning to the next damning slide showing the frantic wire transfers. "What you are looking at is the absolute documented truth." I stated the acoustics of the room, carrying my words to the very back wall. "There is no corporate infrastructure. There is no supply chain matrix. Jamal is not a visionary entrepreneur. He is a desperate, drowning gambling addict who has already secretly mortgaged my parents' home to the absolute brink of foreclosure. If you write a check tonight, it is not going to seed a new business. There is no company. Your investments are going straight to a Vegas sportsbook to save him from offshore loan sharks. The silence in the grand ballroom violently shattered. It was instantly replaced by an uproar of shocked gasps, furious whispers, and the loud clatter of heavy crystal glasses being slammed down onto tables. These guests were not foolish people. They were apex predators in the business world, and looking at the undeniable financial proof projected 50 feet high on the wall, they instantly recognized a sinking ship. Jamal completely lost his mind. The charming, charismatic facade he had worn for years evaporated in a microsecond, leaving behind a terrified, cornered animal. He let out a primal yell of absolute panic. "She is lying!" Jamal screamed, his voice cracking in hysteria, as he lunged across the stage toward the podium, reaching wildly for the laptop cables. "She doctored those files. It is a hack. She is a vindictive, crazy hacker trying to ruin me. Turn it off." Below the stage, Brittany became completely unglued. The grand illusion of her perfect, wealthy marriage had just been publicly incinerated in front of the entire country club elite. She clawed at the expensive fabric of her emerald sequined gown, the dress purchased with stolen loan money, now looking like a physical weight dragging her to the floor. "Get off the stage, Chloe!" Brittany shrieked, her voice shrill and echoing wildly over the escalating noise of the panicked crowd. "Get down right now. You are a lonely, bitter woman trying to destroy us because you have absolutely nothing. Someone pull the plug on that screen." Jamal kept charging forward, throwing his arms out to forcefully shove me away from the microphone. He never made it. Marcus moved with the terrifying fluid speed of a man who had spent his entire career neutralizing violent offenders. He stepped smoothly out of the shadows at the edge of the stage and planted himself directly between Jamal and me. He did not draw a weapon. He did not need to. He simply squared his broad shoulders, expanding his stance to form an impenetrable physical barrier. The bright stage lights caught the gleaming brass buttons of his uniform and illuminated the silver police captain's shield pinned prominently over his heart. The sheer overwhelming presence of a high-ranking law enforcement officer standing in full dress uniform caused Jamal's brain to completely short-circuit. Jamal slammed the brakes on his own momentum, his expensive designer shoes skidding slightly on the polished wooden stage. He froze completely in his tracks, his chest heaving, his eyes wide with stark terror as he stared up at Marcus's unyielding granite expression. Assaulting a civilian was one thing. Assaulting a decorated police captain in front of 150 high society witnesses was an immediate, non-negotiable ticket to a federal penitentiary. At the VIP table, Thomas finally snapped. His entire universe, his pristine reputation, his illusion of wealth, and his absolute authority had just been publicly slaughtered by the daughter he had deemed a worthless failure. His face turned a dangerous apoplectic shade of violet. The veins in his neck bulged visibly as he stood up, knocking his heavy dining chair over backward with a loud crash. "Security!" Thomas bellowed at the top of his lungs, pointing a shaking, furious finger at the stage. He was desperately trying to reclaim a fraction of his shattered control. "Get the club manager out here immediately. I want this woman forcibly removed from the premises. Arrest her. Drag her out of my party right now." The private country club security guards stationed near the main exits did not move to intervene. Instead, they simply stepped aside and held the doors open. A heavy metallic thud echoed from the back of the grand ballroom as the massive mahogany double doors swung forcefully outward. The ambient noise of the panicking crowd instantly died down to a breathless, terrified hush. Instead of the local club bouncers, 4 fully uniformed city police officers walked through the entrance. Their heavy boots marched in perfect, intimidating synchronization against the marble floors, their radios crackling sharply in the silent room as they walked straight down the center aisle toward the stage. Instead of the local club bouncers, 4 fully uniformed city police officers walked through the entrance. Their heavy boots marched in perfect, intimidating synchronization against the marble floors, their radios crackling sharply in the silent room as they walked straight down the center aisle toward the stage. Thomas stood rigid at the VIP table, his chest puffed out in a pathetic display of triumphant arrogance. He actually smiled as the squad approached, mistakenly believing his aggressive demands had summoned the full immediate force of the city police to remove his insubordinate daughter. He pointed a trembling, furious finger at me, ready to issue his final triumphant command to the officers. He was entirely ready to watch me be dragged out of his anniversary gala in disgrace. The lead officer did not even glance in my direction. He walked straight past the elevated stage, completely ignoring my father's outstretched hand, and stopped directly in front of the VIP table. The other three officers instantly fanned out their movements precise and calculated, forming a tight, inescapable physical perimeter around my parents. The lead officer reached onto his heavy leather duty belt and unclipped a pair of solid steel handcuffs. The metallic ratcheting sound echoed like a thunderclap across the dead silent ballroom. A collective, horrified gasp rippled through the crowd of 150 elite guests as the reality of the situation abruptly and violently shifted. Thomas Wilson, the lead officer, announced, his voice projecting a lethal, uncompromising authority that cut through the tension. "You are under arrest. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Thomas dropped his arm, his face instantly drained of all color, shifting from an angry apoplectic red to a sickly translucent white. He looked like a man who had just stepped blindly off a cliff in the dark. For what Thomas stammered, his booming, commanding voice completely reduced to a frantic, breathless squeak. "I am the victim here. This is my anniversary gala. You have the wrong person." Brenda clutched his tuxedo sleeve, her eyes darting wildly between the stern officers and the whispering crowd. The officer did not blink, nor did he lower the handcuffs. "We are executing a felony warrant for your arrest on 3 separate counts." The officer stated, his words carrying clearly to the surrounding tables. "Filing a false police report, grand theft auto by deception and felony insurance fraud." The words hit the crowded room like an incendiary bomb. The wealthy investors, corporate lawyers, and country club socialites who had just been blindly clapping for Thomas now stared at him with undisguised revulsion. "This is a massive mistake!" Thomas screamed, his panic finally overriding his initial shock. He pointed violently back at the stage, his fingers shaking with desperate rage. "It is her doing. She is a vindictive, unstable woman who hacked into my private accounts. She fabricated all of this digital evidence to ruin me." Marcus stepped smoothly down from the stage, moving with predatory grace. His silver captain's badge gleamed under the heavy crystal chandeliers. He approached the VIP table, his sheer physical presence completely dominating my father. "There is no mistake," Thomas Marcus stated, his voice a low, dangerous rumble that commanded absolute, terrified attention. "When you staged that elaborate highway robbery to steal Chloe's vehicle, you forgot one extremely crucial detail. My dress uniform is equipped with a high-definition body cam. I recorded our entire interaction on the dark shoulder of Interstate 95. We have you on crystal-clear audio and video explicitly confessing to extortion. We have your exact threats documented in federal evidence." Thomas took a stumbling step backward, his legs hitting the edge of his dining chair. His mouth opened, but his vocal cords completely failed him. And as for the insurance fraud, Marcus continued, signaling the uniformed officers to move in and secure their suspect. "You claimed Chloe's vehicle was stolen by an unknown assailant and filed a total loss claim for a massive cash payout. Our cybercrimes division executed a search warrant on your internet service provider early this morning. We tracked the exact IP address used to submit those forged insurance documents. The fraudulent submission did not come from Chloe's apartment. It came directly from the primary router bolted to the wall inside your luxury penthouse. You left a glowing digital fingerprint on every single felony you committed." The definitive, inescapable proof shattered the last remaining fragments of Thomas's bravado. He sagged heavily against the dining table, offering absolutely no resistance as the lead officer yanked his arms behind his back and secured the cold steel cuffs tightly around his wrists. Beside him, Brenda completely unraveled. She began to hyperventilate, taking short, ragged gasps of air as a second officer approached her with another set of handcuffs. "You cannot do this to me!" Brenda sobbed hysterically, her manicured hands fluttering uselessly against her expensive silk gown. "We are highly respected members of this community. My closest friends are watching us right now. Think of my reputation. You are ruining my life." The officer ignored her frantic pleas, swiftly pulling her arms back and securing her wrists. The sharp metallic click of the handcuffs locking into place was the final, undeniable nail in the coffin of their manufactured empire. The officers turned my parents around and began the long, agonizing march toward the main exit. Thomas and Brenda were forced to walk the brutal gauntlet down the center aisle, paraded directly past the very people they had spent their entire lives trying to impress and manipulate. The elite guests physically shrank back from them in disgust. They whispered furiously behind their hands, raising their cell phones to record the spectacular, undeniable downfall of the Wilson family. Brenda wept openly, her heavy makeup running down her face in dark, messy streaks. She tried desperately to duck her head and hide her face from the flashing camera lights of her former peers. Thomas kept his eyes glued firmly to the hardwood floor. He was completely stripped of his arrogant pride, finally exposed to the entire city as the petty, pathetic, thieving criminal he truly was. I stood perfectly still on the brightly lit stage and watched them disappear through the heavy mahogany doors. I felt a profound, absolute sense of closure wash over my mind. The toxic anchor that had dragged me down, belittled me, and exploited me for my entire life had finally been cut loose. I took a deep, steadying breath and looked back down toward the VIP table, fully ready to ensure my sister and her fraudulent husband faced their own immediate reckoning. Brittany was still standing exactly where she had been frozen in pure shock, her face deathly pale and streaked with angry, ruined mascara. But the seat right next to her was completely empty. I scanned the chaotic, swirling crowd of panicked investors and loudly gossiping socialites. My eyes darted rapidly across the grand ballroom, sweeping past the abandoned champagne flutes and the overturned dining chairs. Through a brief gap in the shifting bodies, I caught a sudden flash of movement near the back wall. Jamal was not checking on his hysterical wife. He was not staying to defend his fake logistics company. He was quietly and frantically slipping through the swinging service doors that led directly into the catering kitchen, desperately trying to vanish into the night before the police turned their attention to his offshore gambling debts. The heavy mahogany doors swung shut behind the arresting officers, swallowing the hysterical, echoing cries of my parents. But my focus had already shifted away from their public execution. I tapped Marcus lightly on the arm and nodded toward the swinging wooden doors of the catering kitchen. He immediately saw what I saw. The fleeting shadow of Jamal's tailored designer jacket was disappearing into the dimly lit service corridor. We moved in perfect, silent synchronization, abandoning the stunned crowd of socialites and sprinting directly through the maze of stainless steel prep stations. Startled catering staff scrambled out of our way, dropping trays of expensive hors d'oeuvres as we pushed through the heavy metal fire exit doors leading to the VIP valet parking lot. We stepped out into the crisp, cool night air, our eyes quickly scanning the rows of luxury vehicles. A piercing, blood-curdling scream shattered the quiet elegance of the country club grounds. We rounded the corner of the brick facade just in time to witness the brutal, violent end of my sister's carefully manufactured fairy tale. Brittany was actively wrestling with Jamal beside the driver's side door of her pristine white Range Rover. The man she had paraded around the grand ballroom all night as a visionary entrepreneur and a loving husband was viciously twisting her arm, violently ripping the heavy key fob from her perfectly manicured hands. She clawed frantically at his expensive suit jacket, sobbing wildly, demanding to know where he was going and what he was doing. Jamal did not answer her with a comforting lie or a smooth excuse. He answered with a brutal, two-handed shove directly to her chest. Brittany stumbled backward in her heavy emerald gown. Her designer high heels twisted sharply on the unforgiving asphalt. She hit the ground incredibly hard, scraping her bare hands and tearing the expensive hand-stitched silk of her dress. Jamal did not even look down to see if she was injured. He scrambled into the driver's seat of the stolen vehicle, slammed the heavy door, and threw the massive SUV into reverse. The tires shrieked violently against the pavement, sending a thick cloud of acrid white smoke into the air as he peeled out of the VIP lot. He was completely abandoning her, desperately fleeing his massive offshore gambling debts and the rapidly incoming police dragnet. Brittany knelt on the rough, dirty pavement, her breath hitching in ragged, hyperventilating gasps. She watched the glowing red taillights of her own luxury vehicle disappear down the long, winding country club driveway until they vanished completely into the darkness. The perfect husband she had defended so fiercely, the man she had ruthlessly leveraged my parents' entire financial future to support, had just physically assaulted her and stolen her only means of escape, the absolute second the illicit money dried up. The realization hit her with the force of a freight train. Her grand illusion of absolute supremacy and effortless wealth collapsed instantly into a pathetic pile of torn sequins, scraped knees, and undeniable betrayal. While Brittany wept uncontrollably on the cold asphalt, the true depth of our family's toxic conditional loyalty was being thoroughly dismantled in a sterile, brightly lit police precinct across town. Marcus had proactively coordinated the logistics of the arrests before we even arrived at the gala, ensuring Thomas and Brenda were immediately placed in separate, heavily monitored interrogation rooms upon arrival. The impenetrable united front they had maintained for decades to terrorize, isolate, and manipulate me disintegrated the very second they faced real, undeniable federal consequences. In interrogation room, a Thomas sat tightly handcuffed to a metal table. His expensive tuxedo jacket was hopelessly crumpled, and his silk tie hung loosely around his sweating neck. When the lead financial detective presented the time-stamped IP logs and the digital copies of the forged second mortgage documents, Thomas's arrogant bravado instantly folded. He pointed a trembling, desperate finger directly at his wife. He screamed that Brenda was the sole mastermind behind the entire operation, frantically claiming she had completely fabricated the story about my vehicle being stolen to cover her own obsessive, out-of-control spending habits. He insisted she was the only one who filed the false police report ruthlessly, trying to trade her freedom for his own. 2 doors down in interrogation room C, Brenda was putting on the theatrical performance of a lifetime. Her expensive mascara was completely ruined, leaving dark, jagged streaks down her pale cheeks as she sobbed loudly to a female investigator. But her dramatic tears were not born out of remorse or guilt for the crimes she had committed against me. They were tears of pure, unadulterated self-preservation. When confronted with the undeniable total loss insurance claim, Brenda threw Thomas straight under the oncoming bus. She wailed that she was just a terrified, obedient wife who had been maliciously forced to go along with Thomas's aggressive financial schemes. She aggressively blamed him for the massive insurance fraud, claiming he had psychologically manipulated her into lying to the authorities because his failing manufacturing company was secretly drowning in insurmountable debt. Decades of manufactured family unity built entirely on their shared narcissism and their mutual delight in making me the designated family scapegoat evaporated into thin air. When faced with the terrifying reality of federal prison time, they viciously turned on each other like starving wolves, completely eager to watch their partner burn if it meant saving their own meticulously crafted reputation. I stood quietly in the cool night air of the country club parking lot. The flashing red and blue lights of the backup patrol cruisers were just beginning to illuminate the distant wrought iron gates. Marcus stood faithfully beside me, his warm hand resting securely on the small of my back, offering a silent, grounding strength that I had never known before. I looked down at the pathetic, shivering figure kneeling on the asphalt. Brittany's ruined emerald gown was heavily soaked with spilled engine oil and muddy puddle water. Her heavy, expensive diamond jewelry looked utterly absurd against her bruised and trembling skin. She was completely stranded, utterly penniless, and entirely abandoned by the criminal she had blindly trusted. Slowly shaking with the evening chill and the shock of her new reality, Brittany lifted her head. Her face was a horrific, distorted mask of smeared makeup and absolute crushing despair. She locked eyes with me, looking up at the sister she had mocked, belittled, and gleefully pushed out of the family empire just hours ago. Her thin shoulders shook with violent, uncontrollable sobs. She raised her scraped, bleeding hand, reaching out toward me across the dark, unforgiving pavement in a desperate, silent plea for salvation. Brittany's hand hung suspended in the cold night air, trembling violently. The flashing red and blue lights from the police cruisers at the front gate cast harsh, alternating shadows across her tear-stained face. She looked down at her bleeding palms, then back up at me, her eyes wide with a frantic, animalistic panic. The reality of her total ruin was finally breaking through her lifelong delusion. "Please!" Brittany gasped, her voice a ragged, desperate wheeze. "Chloe, please!" My purse was in the car. Jamal took my phone. He took my cards. He took everything. "You have to give me a ride. You have to get me out of here before the police come around the back of the building." I did not move a single muscle. I stood beside Marcus, feeling the solid, grounding warmth of his presence, and looked down at the woman who had spent 30 years making my existence a living hell. Brittany scrambled forward on her hands and knees, ignoring the sharp gravel tearing into the delicate silk of her designer gown. She grabbed the hem of my tailored trousers. "I have absolutely no money, Chloe," she sobbed, her chest heaving as she completely abandoned her pride. "You know Jamal drained the accounts. You just showed it to the entire room." "I am completely destitute. You are rich. You have that massive corporate buyout. I need cash. Just enough to get a hotel to hire a lawyer to figure this out. I am begging you." When I maintained my absolute icy silence, Brittany resorted to her oldest, most toxic tactic. She attempted to manipulate my empathy. She placed both of her scraped hands protectively over her stomach, looking up at me with wide, manufactured innocence. "I am pregnant, Chloe," she wailed, her voice echoing off the brick walls of the country club. "I did not tell Mom and Dad yet, but Jamal and I are having a baby. You cannot leave a pregnant woman alone in a freezing parking lot with the police swarming the building. You have to help me. I am your sister. You have to help your sister." I stared down at her hands resting on her stomach. I felt absolutely nothing. No pity, no familial obligation, no sudden rush of sisterly affection. The biological reality of our shared DNA was a meaningless technicality. I looked at her ruined emerald gown. I remembered the blinding price tag attached to those hand-stitched sequins. I remembered the forged second mortgage that had paid for it. I remembered the countless times she had stood beside our parents, smirking in triumph while they systematically tore me down. I remembered her mocking my career, laughing at my clothes, and gleefully cheering when Thomas tried to evict me from my own home. "You do not get to invoke the word sister tonight," I said, my voice dropping to a calm, clinical register that cut through the cold air like a scalpel. "You do not get to weaponize a child you just conceived with a degenerate criminal to force me into saving you." Brittany recoiled, as if I had physically struck her, her mouth falling open in shock. "You spent your whole life tearing me down to build yourself up." I continued my words, slow, deliberate, and entirely devoid of mercy. "You reveled in my pain. You actively participated in every single lie Thomas and Brenda ever told. You defended a man who stole from our parents, and you wore the spoils of his theft like a crown. You watched Jamal try to destroy me, and you cheered him on." "Chloe, please, you do not understand." Brittany stammered, her hands falling away from her stomach as her manipulative facade crumbled. "I had no choice. I had to maintain the image." "You made your choice," I corrected her sharply. "You chose the image over reality. You chose a fraudulent lifestyle over basic human decency. And now the illusion is over. The bill has come due, Brittany, and you are going to pay it all by yourself. I am not your safety net. I will never be your safety net again." She stared at me, her eyes completely vacant as the finality of my words sank into her bones. There would be no rescue. There would be no magical bailout. The golden child was finally going to face the brutal, unfiltered consequences of her own actions. I turned my back on her. I did not offer her a hand up. I did not offer to call her a cab. I simply walked away. Marcus matched my pace, his hand resting lightly on the small of my back as we crossed the dark asphalt toward my vehicle. We reached my sleek black Porsche Panamera, parked under the security lights. Marcus opened the passenger door for me, his eyes scanning the perimeter one last time before he walked around to the driver's side. He started the engine. The powerful engineered roar of the Porsche shattered the quiet night. As Marcus shifted into gear and pulled away from the curb, I looked in the side mirror. Brittany was still sitting alone on the cold pavement, a tiny, pathetic speck of ruined emerald silk, illuminated by the harsh security lamps weeping into her empty hands as the police sirens grew louder in the distance. The drive back to the city was quiet, peaceful, and profoundly liberating. The suffocating weight of my family's expectations had been entirely obliterated. I had walked into that country club as the designated scapegoat and walked out as a woman who had completely reclaimed her own power. The next morning dawned bright, crisp, and brilliantly clear. I sat in the sprawling, glass-walled conference room of my downtown legal firm. The city skyline stretched out before me, a vast landscape of opportunity and untethered freedom. My lead asset protection attorney sat across the heavy mahogany table, sliding a thick stack of finalized trust documents toward me. "We are executing the final phase today," Chloe, the attorney stated, tapping the signature line with a gold pen. "These impenetrable corporate structures and blind trusts will permanently sever any remaining financial tethers to your biological relatives. Your wealth, your properties, and your corporate assets are now completely locked behind a legal fortress. They will never be able to touch a single cent." I picked up the pen, the cool metal feeling heavy and decisive in my hand. I looked down at the documents that would officially, legally, and permanently cement my absolute independence. I pressed the heavy gold pen to the thick, crisp paper and signed my name on the final dotted line. The smooth stroke of dark blue ink felt like the physical breaking of a rusted heavy chain that had dragged me down since childhood. My lead asset protection attorney silently gathered the execution copies, neatly organizing them, before sliding the entire stack into a secure leather briefcase. My wealth, my real estate portfolio, and my corporate equity were now completely sealed behind an impenetrable wall of blind trusts and restricted holding companies. My fortress was built. My toxic relatives would never be able to touch a single solitary cent of my money. Exactly 2 months later, the absolute reality of their actions caught up with them in the sterile, unyielding environment of the municipal courthouse. The harsh, fluorescent lighting of the courtroom was a brutal, unforgiving contrast to the soft crystal chandeliers of the country club where their downfall began. Thomas and Brenda stood before the presiding judge looking entirely deflated and utterly unrecognizable. Thomas wore a cheap, off-the-rack suit that hung loosely on his shrinking frame, his former commanding posture replaced by a defeated slump. Brenda stood beside him without a single drop of makeup, her hair flat and her shoulders shaking. They were absolutely terrified of federal prison. To avoid serving a decade behind bars, they had eagerly and pathetically accepted a brutal plea deal negotiated by their exhausted public defender. The judge read the terms aloud, his voice echoing coldly across the empty wooden benches of the gallery. They were sentenced to 5 years of intensive, heavily supervised probation. They were slapped with massive 6-figure punitive fines for filing a false police report and for orchestrating a coordinated insurance fraud scheme. Furthermore, the court ordered mandatory monthly restitution payments that would completely drain their few remaining liquid assets. They avoided jail time, but they had traded their physical freedom for absolute, inescapable financial ruin. They walked out of the courtroom as convicted felons, stripped of their pride and their bank accounts. The legal hits did not stop at the courthouse doors. The massive financial institution holding the deed to their pristine, sprawling estate initiated an aggressive, immediate audit the moment Jamal's offshore gambling ring was exposed to the public. The bank auditors easily unraveled Jamal's fraudulent second mortgage. Because Thomas had blindly enabled the transaction to save his own failing image, and because Brenda had willingly participated in covering up the financial bleeding through her illegal insurance scams, the bank showed absolutely zero mercy. They moved forward with an immediate hostile foreclosure. The massive oak doors of my childhood home were padlocked by city marshals. A bright neon eviction notice was plastered directly across the pristine front windows for the entire neighborhood to see. Everything they had hoarded over the decades, The expensive antique furniture, the imported Persian rugs, the crystal vases they had valued over my own happiness, was swiftly seized and auctioned off to satisfy their crushing, insurmountable debts. They were thrown out onto the street, left with absolutely nothing but the cheap clothes on their backs and a few garbage bags filled with worthless personal items. Meanwhile, Jamal had arrogantly believed he was smarter than the authorities. He was dead wrong. He did not even make it out of the region. State troopers apprehended him exactly 3 states away. He was aggressively tackled to the pavement in the grimy, oil-stained parking lot of a low-rent pawn shop. He was actively trying to sell Brittany's stolen white Range Rover for a pathetic fraction of its actual value just to secure quick cash. The federal agents waiting for him at the precinct did not offer him any lenient plea deals. They stacked federal wire fraud, grand theft auto, and interstate flight to avoid prosecution into an impenetrable, towering mountain of evidence. He was currently sitting in a maximum security holding cell, staring down a guaranteed 20-year sentence in a federal penitentiary. Brittany was forced to watch the charming entrepreneur she had ruthlessly defended trade his tailored suits for a bright orange jumpsuit. The social fallout for my parents was even more devastating to them than the legal and financial consequences. Their entire identities were intrinsically tied to their perceived elite status, and that status was completely incinerated overnight. The exclusive country club immediately and permanently revoked their membership, sending a highly publicized letter banning them from the premises. The wealthy friends Brenda used to host for lavish catered luncheons completely cut all ties. Former peers literally crossed the street to avoid walking past her and immediately blocked her phone number. Thomas was forcibly removed in total disgrace from every single corporate board he had ever manipulated. They became absolute pariahs in the high society circles they had ruthlessly ruled and worshipped for decades. Utterly invisible and completely forgotten, they were reduced to renting a cramped, dingy pest-infested one-bedroom apartment on the industrial outskirts of the city. I was standing on the expansive, sunlit balcony of my downtown penthouse, sipping hot coffee and watching the vibrant city wake up. The morning air was crisp and clear. My phone suddenly buzzed against the glass patio table. The caller ID flashed a number I had deliberately ignored for exactly 60 days. I did not answer it. I let it ring until it went straight to voicemail, then calmly tapped the screen to listen to the audio file. Brenda's voice filled the quiet morning air, completely stripped of her former arrogant, demanding authority. She sounded frantic, weeping uncontrollably, and violently hyperventilating into the receiver. "Chloe, please." Her voice cracked, sounding desperate, thin, and terrified. "We have absolutely nothing left. Thomas cannot find work. We are being evicted from this awful freezing apartment next week. We are going to be on the street. You have all those empty guest rooms in your luxury penthouse. You have to let us move in. You have to save us. We are your family. Please, Chloe. I am begging you." I stood perfectly still, looking out over the beautiful sweeping skyline, listening as the voicemail ended with her pathetic, gasping sobs. I stood perfectly still, looking out over the beautiful sweeping skyline, listening as the voicemail ended with her pathetic, gasping sobs. The digital silence lasted for exactly 3 seconds before the screen lit up again. The device vibrated violently against the smooth glass of the patio table. "Incoming call, Brenda." I stared at the glowing letters. For 30 years, that name flashing on a screen had triggered an immediate Pavlovian response of anxiety, guilt, and deep dread. I used to scramble to answer, terrified of the berating lecture that would follow if I missed her call by even a single ring. Today, my pulse did not accelerate. My palms did not sweat. I reached down, picked up the sleek device, and swiped the green icon to accept the call. I brought the phone to my ear and said absolutely nothing. Chloe. Brenda shrieked the absolute second the line connected. Her voice was shrill, desperate, and entirely stripped of the haughty country club refinement she had carefully cultivated her entire life. "Thank God you answered. You have to listen to me." I remained perfectly silent, letting her frantic energy hang in the crisp morning air. "We have nothing." "Chloe," she wailed, her breath hitching in a theatrical display of manufactured panic. The bank took everything. The marshals threw us out onto the pavement like common criminals. We are sleeping in a disgusting freezing apartment. The heating barely works. Your father is sick. He cannot find employment. Every single one of our friends has blocked our numbers. We are completely destitute. She paused, clearly, waiting for me to offer a sympathetic gasp or a hurried promise of financial rescue. When I offered only a cold, unbroken silence, she pivoted immediately to her oldest, most reliable weapon. She tried to induce massive, overwhelming guilt. "You cannot leave your own mother to rot in the gutter," Brenda sobbed, her voice taking on a harsh, demanding edge. "We raised you. We put a roof over your head. We fed you and clothed you for 18 years. You owe us, Chloe. After everything we did to give you a life, you owe us your help. You have millions of dollars and a massive penthouse with empty bedrooms. You have to send a car for us right now." I looked down at the bustling city streets far below my balcony. I watched the tiny vehicles navigating the morning rush hour, completely detached from the hysterical woman screaming into my ear. I did not raise my voice. I did not feel a single ounce of the searing anger that used to consume me. I felt only a profound, clinical detachment. "You spent your whole life tearing me down to build yourself up," I stated. My voice was incredibly calm, echoing with an absolute, unshakable authority that cut straight through her hysterical sobbing. "Chloe, please," Brenda stammered, completely derailed by my icy tone. "You reported me to the police to extort me." I continued my words slow, deliberate, and utterly devoid of mercy. "You actively participated in a scheme to frame me for grand theft auto. You filed fraudulent insurance claims to steal my money. You tried to ruin my life, throw me in a federal prison, and steal my business. And you did all of this to protect a degenerate scammer simply because he married your favorite daughter. But Thomas made me." Brenda cried out, reverting instantly to playing the helpless victim. I was terrified. "He forced me to go along with it." "You are not a victim, Brenda," I replied effortlessly, shutting down her pathetic excuse. "You are a willing, malicious participant who got caught. You defended a man who stole from your own accounts, and you tried to destroy me to cover your tracks. I am not your safety net. You are facing the exact unfiltered consequences of your own choices. We are no longer family." "No. Wait, do not you dare hang up on me," Brenda shrieked, her voice pitching into a wild, feral panic. "You owe me." I pulled the phone away from my ear and pressed the red button, instantly cutting off her shrill demands. The silence that followed was beautifully profound. Without hesitating for a fraction of a second, I navigated to her contact profile and tapped block. I pulled up Thomas's number and blocked it. I found Brittany's contact and blocked her as well. I systematically went through my phone and permanently blocked every single extended relative, former family friend, and country club associate who had ever enabled their toxic behavior or participated in their decades of abuse. I walked back inside the spacious, sunlit penthouse and walked directly to the sleek marble kitchen island. I opened my laptop, the screen illuminating my calm reflection. I drafted a single concise email to my lead attorney. The extensive paperwork for the permanent restraining orders and the absolute no-contact mandates had been ready for weeks. I typed a brief command authorizing his team to file the documents with the federal court immediately. Thomas, Brenda, and Brittany were now legally barred from coming within 500 feet of me, my properties, my corporate offices, or my assets. Any attempt to contact me would result in their immediate arrest and the absolute revocation of their probation. I clicked send. The exact second the email transmitted, a massive physical transformation occurred within my body. The crushing, suffocating weight I had carried squarely on my shoulders since early childhood completely evaporated. The deeply ingrained burden of seeking validation from people who were fundamentally incapable of loving me vanished into the ether. I took a slow, deep breath, filling my lungs with clean, unburdened air. The toxic cycle was permanently shattered. I was completely, undeniably free. I closed the laptop and set my phone face down on the cold marble counter. I turned and walked slowly toward the expansive glass doors leading out to the wraparound terrace. The morning sun was rising higher, reflecting brilliantly off the surrounding glass skyscrapers and bathing my home in warm golden light. Marcus was waiting for me near the edge of the glass balcony, leaning casually against the metal railing. The morning breeze ruffled his dark hair. He turned his head as I approached, a warm, incredibly genuine smile breaking across his handsome face. In his strong hands, he held two crystal flutes of vintage champagne, the golden bubbles rising perfectly to the surface in the morning light. I took the chilled glass from his extended hand, the heavy crystal cool and grounding against my palm. We stood shoulder to shoulder at the edge of the world I had built for myself, looking out over a city that was finally mine to conquer. Marcus raised his glass slightly, his eyes locking onto mine with a fierce, quiet pride. To absolute freedom, he said, his voice carrying over the distant hum of the morning traffic. I tapped my rim against his, the delicate chime ringing out clear and sharp. To peace, I replied, and took a long, slow sip. 6 months passed in a brilliant, breathtaking blur of unhindered progress. Without the constant, suffocating anchor of my family's demands dragging me down, my life accelerated at a pace I had never thought possible. Across the city, tucked away in the shadows of a decaying industrial district, my parents were living out the brutal, unfiltered reality of their choices. Their new reality was a cramped, run-down one-bedroom apartment situated above a noisy commercial laundromat. The walls were paper-thin, stained with years of neglect and peeling paint. The air constantly smelled of bleach, damp mildew, and inescapable despair. Thomas and Brenda spent their days locked in bitter, vicious screaming matches, viciously blaming each other for their total ruin. Thomas, once a towering figure of corporate intimidation, was now a hollow, exhausted man who spent his days scanning rejection emails for entry-level clerical positions. Brenda, stripped of her designer wardrobe and elite country club luncheons, was reduced to clipping coupons and taking the public bus to the discount grocery store. They were completely miserable, utterly isolated, and permanently trapped in a hell of their own meticulous design. Brittany's fate was even more poetic. The former golden child who had never worked a legitimate day in her life was now clocking 50 hours a week at a harsh, fluorescent-lit discount retail store. Her expensive hand-stitched emerald gowns had been forcefully replaced by a stiff neon polyester uniform and an unflattering plastic name tag. She spent her days on her feet, enduring the screams of irate customers and sweeping up shattered merchandise. The moment her meager paycheck hit her bank account, it was immediately and aggressively garnished by federal authorities to pay down the massive, lingering mountain of restitution and legal fees Jamal had left behind. Her pristine, manufactured innocence had been completely eradicated. She was just another tired, defeated worker, navigating the brutal consequences of a fraudulent life, her golden pedestal smashed into unrecognizable dust. While they drowned in the shallow end of their own toxic choices, I was preparing to take the world by storm. My cybersecurity firm, the company Thomas had relentlessly mocked as a pathetic hobby, officially went public. The initial public offering was a massive, unprecedented triumph. I stood on the balcony of the stock exchange, the digital ticker tape flashing the name of my company in bright green lights as the opening bell rang out. The stock opened at triple its projected value. In a matter of minutes, the financial algorithms cemented what I already knew. I was incredibly, undeniably wealthy. But the staggering surge of capital in my accounts was entirely secondary to the absolute untouchable independence it granted me. I was featured in global financial magazines, invited to speak at international tech summits, and universally respected as a titan in my industry. I had built an empire entirely with my own two hands, forged in the fires of my own relentless determination. The crowning achievement of my new life arrived on a secluded, pristine stretch of white sand beach in the Caribbean. The late afternoon sun was melting into the horizon, casting a warm, golden glow across the crashing waves. The air tasted of salt and blooming jasmine. There were no massive floral centerpieces to impress high society snobs. There were no tense seating charts designed to manage toxic family politics. There was absolutely no trace of Thomas Brenda or Brittany. They were ghosts completely exorcised from my existence. Instead, I was surrounded by a small, tightly knit circle of chosen family. My loyal colleagues who had helped build my firm from the ground up stood smiling in the sand. The brilliant asset protection attorney who had helped me sever my financial chains wiped a genuine tear from his eye. They were people who celebrated my victories without an ounce of jealousy, people who offered support without hidden agendas. I wore a simple, elegant silk gown that caught the ocean breeze. Marcus stood waiting for me by the water, looking incredibly handsome in a light linen suit. As I walked down the sandy aisle, I did not feel a single drop of the anxiety or dread that had plagued my childhood. My heart beat with a steady, powerful rhythm. We exchanged our vows over the sound of the rolling tide, promising each other a future built on total honesty, unwavering loyalty, and mutual respect. When he kissed me, the small crowd erupted into genuine heartfelt cheers. Later that evening, as the reception hummed with music and laughter, I slipped away from the brightly lit tent and walked down to the water's edge. The ocean was dark and vast, reflecting the brilliant canopy of stars above. Marcus appeared quietly beside me, slipping his warm hand firmly into mine. He did not ask what I was thinking. He simply stood with me, sharing the perfect silence. I looked out at the endless horizon and took a deep, cleansing breath. For years, I had believed that justice required a battlefield. I had thought that vindication meant actively tearing down the people who had hurt me, forcing them to feel the pain they had so casually inflicted on me. But as the cool water rushed over my bare feet, I finally understood the truth. The sweetest, most devastating revenge was not found in their destruction. The ultimate victory was simply stepping entirely out of their suffocating shadow. It was building a brilliant, radiant, and peaceful life that their toxic hands could never ever touch. I squeezed Marcus's hand, feeling the solid, unbreakable reality of the love and the empire I had created. I looked up at the stars, a genuine, radiant smile breaking across my face as the sound of the ocean washed the last remnants of the past away. I had finally achieved true absolute peace. The most profound lesson from Chloe's journey is that true vindication does not come from seeking revenge or destroying those who betrayed you, but from reclaiming your own power. For years, she carried the heavy burden of trying to earn love from a family inherently incapable of giving it. When she finally severed those toxic ties, she realized that ultimate peace is found by stepping entirely out of their shadow. Healing requires the absolute courage to set unbreakable boundaries and build an authentic, independent life they can no longer touch. Please share your own experiences of walking away from toxicity in the comments below.